Chapter 107. These herbs are blood spirit grass, and those are illusory sun grass. These herbs are evil heart flowers, and they are highly poisonous. I can't touch them with my hands. Ji Tianqing stood on the roof, bent down to identify the herbs, and carefully tidied them up. He had studied the 1,000 medicine collection diligently before, and now he could identify more than 1,000 herbs. Therefore, he was no stranger to the tens of thousands of herbs on the roof. When he had to tidy up the evil heart flowers, he had to tear a piece of cloth from his robe and wrap it up to avoid being poisoned if he touched it with his hands. After a while, he jumped from the roof back to the courtyard with 12 herbs in his left hand and 12 evil heart flowers wrapped in cloth in his right hand. The alchemy room was next to the lobby, and it was an extremely spacious and bright room. After Ji Tianqing entered the alchemy room, he saw 3 alchemy furnaces of different sizes in the center of the room. The smallest alchemy furnace was only the size of a wash basin, and it was made of brass and other materials. The largest black alchemy furnace was more than 3 meters tall, and it looked ancient and very mysterious. On the 4 walls of the alchemy room, there were rows of hidden compartments of different sizes, and each compartment was engraved with the name of a herb. There were at least 3,600 hidden compartments on the 4 walls, and they were used to store more than 3,600 kinds of herbs. Obviously, these were the alchemy room's medicine cabinets. Ji Tianqing stared at the countless hidden compartments on the wall, and after searching for a full quarter of an hour, he found the hidden compartment that stored the blood spirit grass, illusory sun grass, and evil heart flowers, and put these 3 herbs in. Then, he walked out of the alchemy room, jumped to the roof on the west side, and bent down to continue identifying the herbs. Although he could recognize most of the herbs, there were a few that he had not seen before. He could only flip through the 1,000 medicine collection and identify the herbs that he did not recognize. Time passed quietly, and the sun in the sky gradually set in the west. After 2 hours, Ji Tianqing had only tidied up more than 400 herbs, and identified more than 50 kinds. At this speed, it would take him at least 3 days to finish tidying up the tens of thousands of herbs on the roof. There was nothing he could do about it. During this period of time, he encountered 2 medicinal herbs that he did not recognize. He could only patiently read through the 1,000 medicine collection to find the answer. At this moment, Xiang Wuji's voice came from the hall again. The old man was clearly getting impatient. "Brat! How long will it take for you to finish cleaning up the herbs if you keep dawdling like this?" Ji Tianqing was also a little anxious and angry. He held a palm-sized dark brown herb and explained to Wuji, "Senior, this junior has already done his best. However, when I encounter herbs that I don't recognize, I can only look at the 1,000 herb collection to identify them. I don't dare to place them randomly." Xiang Wuji sneered and said contemptuously, "You don't even know the 5 lights Ganoderma, and you still have the nerve to say that you've seen the 1,000 medicine collection? The 5 lights Ganoderma grows on dry rocks facing the sun. It contains earth and fire elemental energy of heaven and earth. It's the main ingredient for refining the wind fire Xian pill and good dust Xian pill." Although Xiang Wuji's tone was unfriendly, he casually mentioned the name of the herb, its growth characteristics and effects. This saved Ji Tianqing a lot of time. He listened carefully to Xiang Wuji's words and memorized the appearance, effects and characteristics of the 5 lights Ganoderma. Following this, his speed of cleaning up the herbs was indeed much faster. Another 2 hours passed. Ji Tianqing had cleaned up another 1,000 herbs and identified more than 70 herbs. However, he quickly encountered more than 10 herbs that he didn't recognize. He wanted to ask Xiang Wuji, but when he thought of Xiang Wuji's bad attitude and tone, he dismissed the idea. He squatted on the roof and flipped through the 1,000 herb collection, trying to find the answer in the book. 15 minutes passed. Ji Tianqing found a herb called the demon spirit flower in the 1,000 herb collection. It was very similar to the herb in his hand. However, after careful identification and comparison, he realized that the herb in his hand wasn't the demon spirit flower. It was just very similar. Ji Tianqing had no choice but to continue flipping through the 1,000-herb collection. Very quickly, an hour passed. He finished flipping through half of the 1,000-herb collection, but still found nothing. At this time, Xiang Wuji's voice rang out in the hall. "Kid, don't waste your time. Even if you turn the 1,000-herb collection upside down, you won't find the answer. The herb in your hand is very precious. It's called the God Flame herb. This herb isn't recorded in the 1,000-herb collection, nor in the spiritual herb garden." Ji Tianqing silently listened. He memorized the appearance of the God Flame herb and what Xiang Wuji said. Unknowingly, 8 hours passed. The sun had set and the sky was dark. Night was about to fall. Ji Tianqing worked hard for 8 hours. In total, he had cleaned up more than 5,000 herbs and identified more than 700 types. However, even with his hard work, he had only completed a third of the task. His heart was a little uneasy. He was secretly guessing how the damned old man would react. After a while, Xiang Wuji brought Qianyu out of the hall and into the courtyard. He glanced at the herbs on the roof and said calmly, "It's getting dark. You should go back to the storm courtyard. Come back tomorrow and continue working." Ji Tianqing was a little surprised. He didn't expect Xiang Wuji to not be angry. He hesitated and asked, "Senior, the herbs are still on the roof. There will be dew at night. It won't do to soak the herbs." Before he could finish his words, he saw a shocking scene. Xiang Wuji casually waved his hand and sent out an invisible force. It wrapped around the countless herbs on the roof. The 10,000 herbs flew in front of Xiang Wuji and flowed into the black thumb ring on his left hand. In the blink of an eye, Xiang Wuji had collected the 10,000 herbs. The whole process was very easy. To him, it was as simple as eating and drinking. After collecting the herbs, Xiang Wuji turned and left with Qianyu. Ji Tianqing stared at Xiang Wuji's back in shock. After a long time, he came back to his senses. Ah! That damned old man! He could have collected all the herbs with a wave of his hand, but he made me jump up and down on the roof for the whole afternoon. He's doing this on purpose. Too hateful. Ji Tianqing was very angry and ashamed. He clenched his fists and roared in his heart. A moment later, Xiang Wuji and Qianyu disappeared into the depths of the palace. Ji Tianqing could only suppress the anger in his heart and leave the great palace before it got dark. When he returned to the wind cloud courtyard, it was already dark. When he returned to his room, he collapsed on the bed to rest. He didn't even want to move a finger. Today in the great palace, he had been attacked by the old man's sword energy and had almost used up all his true essence. Then he had been punished to collect the herbs on the roof. He had jumped up and down a few hundred times. He was already exhausted. Fortunately, after he ate dinner, he recovered his strength. After eating, he sat at the table and thought about what had happened during the day. Although today in the great palace, I was miserably messed with by that damned old man. I was so tired that my bones were about to fall apart. But thinking about it carefully, I remembered more than 1,000 herbs today. I also recognized 2 herbs that were not in the 1,000 medicine collection. That damned old man attacked me with his sword energy and forced me to use a light body technique on the roof. It also increased my reaction and speed a lot. I can also use the light body technique more easily. It seems that a difficult situation can train a person. If I had been in secluded cultivation in my room, I wouldn't have been able to achieve this effect. I wouldn't have improved so quickly. Chapter 108. For the next 2 days, Ji Tianqing went to the Grand Peace Palace to work every day. Every day, he would leave early in the morning and only return to the storm courtyard when it was dark. Every day, he would be exhausted. In the first 2 days, Xiang Wuji placed more than 10,000 medicinal herbs on the roof to dry. Ji Tianqing had to organize the dried herbs and place them into the medicine cabinet in the pill room. While he was organizing the herbs on the roof, Xiang Wuji sat in the main hall drinking tea or resting with his eyes closed. Every time he encountered an unknown herb, Xiang Wuji would insult him and then tell him the herb's name, characteristics, and effects. After 2 days of work, Ji Tianqing finally organized more than 10,000 herbs and placed them into the medicine cabinet without any mistakes. During this time, he had clearly identified more than 3,000 herbs in the 1,000 medicine collection and had a deep impression of them. In addition, he also recognized more than 100 special herbs. They were all rare species that didn't exist in the 1,000 medicine collection or the spirit medicine garden. On the 3rd day, Ji Tianqing finally didn't have to organize the herbs anymore. He originally thought that he could finally sweep the floor in peace and no longer be tortured by Xiang Wuji's tricks. However, he didn't think that Xiang Wuji would punish him to take care of the herbs in the medicine garden. The Grand Peace Palace's medicine garden was Xiang Wuji's private medicine garden. Although this medicine garden wasn't as big as the spirit medicine garden in the sky upholding peak, it was still a full kilometer in radius. There were more than 3,600 types of herbs in the medicine garden. In total, there were more than 100,000 stalks. Ji Tianqing's task was to continuously water the herbs, loosen the soil, remove the weeds, and prune the branches and leaves every day. In the beginning, Ji Tianqing refused this tedious and tiring task. He was very unwilling to accept it. However, Xiang Wuji confidently said that his medicine garden was the best in the sky upholding sect and planted with the most precious and rare herbs. Ji Tianqing should feel extremely honored and proud to be able to enter his private medicine garden. Countless genius disciples, deacons, and elders of the sky upholding sect wanted to help him take care of the herbs in his medicine garden, but they didn't have the fortune to do so. Moreover, Ji Tianqing was now a criminal. He had to accept his punishment and work honestly. Only then could his punishment be reduced. Under Xiang Wuji's threats and promises, Ji Tianqing had no choice but to work in the herb garden and take care of the herbs. Every day, he dealt with more than 3,000 kinds of medicinal herbs. He was busy from dawn to nightfall, and only then did he drag his tired body back to the Tempest courtyard. Of course, Ji Tianqing had worked in the medicinal garden for 2 days, and it was still very rewarding. He knew more than 3,000 kinds of herbs like the back of his hand. He didn't need to look at the 1,000 herbs collection at all, and he could casually mention the growth habits and effects of various herbs. Just like that, 7 days passed in the blink of an eye. This morning, Ji Tianqing had just finished washing up and was about to head to Great Peace Palace. Suddenly, the bell rang in the main hall of the Fengyun courtyard. Ji Tianqing hurriedly stopped in his tracks. Together with the other disciples of the Tempest Hall, they quickly gathered in the main hall. After a short 100 breaths of time, the 10 disciples of the Tempest Hall were all present. Han Qiusheng and Du Wu walked into the main hall and sat at the head of the table. Han Qiusheng glanced at the 10 disciples in the main hall. With a solemn expression, he said, "Everyone, 7 days have passed. I believe that after 7 days of study, you have all memorized the 1,000 herbs collection by heart. You all have a clear understanding of the contents of the book." The disciples didn't open their mouths to speak, but most of them revealed confident smiles. They had a posture of having a card up their sleeve. Han Qiusheng saw everyone's reaction and nodded his head in satisfaction. He then continued, "Today, I want to test you all. Have you studied diligently in the past 7 days? The one with the best performance will be rewarded with a special overflowing origin pill." Hearing the 3 words overflowing origin pill, the disciples were stunned for a moment. Their faces were filled with pleasant surprise and excitement. The reward is actually a overflowing origin pill. That's great. I've long heard of the miraculous effects of the overflowing origin pill. This is a profound level high-grade pill. After taking it, it can greatly enhance one's cultivation. It's equivalent to a year of our bitter cultivation. Deacon Han is really generous. It's just a small test, but he's actually willing to take out such a miraculous profound level pill. I must obtain the overflowing origin pill. If I can take a overflowing origin pill, I'll definitely be able to reach the profound understanding realm within half a year. Several disciples were discussing in low voices. Their faces were filled with excitement and anticipation. Especially Shi Jingqing and Emo. They were determined to obtain the overflowing origin pill. The two of them didn't put the other disciples in their eyes. They only regarded each other as competitors. Their eyes were filled with hostility. At this time, Han Qiusheng took out a palm-sized black cloth bag from his sleeve and placed it on the table. He stretched out his hand and touched the black cloth bag. Out of thin air, he took out a dark green herb. Everyone, do you know what kind of herb this is? Ji Tianqing and the other disciples immediately stared at the herb and carefully observed it. The herb was as long as a chopstick. It had a cluster of white roots and 6 leaves. It was dark green all over and emitted a faint spiritual qi. Everyone instantly recognized the herb and said in unison, "This is the spirit void herb." Han Qiusheng nodded and looked at Nie Hao, tell us about the characteristics and effects of this spirit void herb. Nie Hao said calmly, the spirit void herb is commonly seen in swamps filled with miasma. It needs to grow for 8 years to mature. After he finished speaking in an orderly manner, Han Qiusheng revealed a satisfied smile. He put the spirit void grass back into the black cloth bag, and then took out a half-meter long dark brown herb from the bag. Seeing this, Ji Tianqing immediately understood that Han Qiusheng's black cloth bag was the same as his 100 treasures brocade pouch. They were both storage treasures with space inside. Han Qiusheng held the herb and asked calmly, "Everyone, do you know what kind of herb this is?" This time, everyone frowned and carefully observed for a moment before someone answered one after another. "This is the yellow tooth whisker." "Yes, this is the yellow tooth whisker." Han Qiusheng called out Ji Ling's name and let Ji Ling explain the characteristics and effects of the yellow tooth whisker. Ji Ling revealed a confident smile and said in a confident tone, "The yellow tooth whisker usually grows in the yellow soil halfway up the mountain. There will be poisonous snakes guarding within 3 meters of it." After he finished speaking, Han Qiusheng took out a few more herbs for everyone to identify. Each herb was more rare than the last. The time the disciples had to observe and think became longer and longer. When it came to the last herb, everyone observed it for half an hour but no one dared to say with certainty. Only Ji Tianqing had an answer in his heart after observing for 100 breaths. He just kept his mouth shut. Han Qiusheng frowned and said in a serious tone, "What? What have you been doing these 7 days? Don't tell me you can't even recognize this herb." Shi Jingqing, Emo, and Ji Ling were originally hesitant. After hearing Han Qiusheng's words, the 3 immediately answered and said in unison, "Deacon Han, this is the spirit sealing orchid." The other disciples also chimed in, saying that the herb was the spirit sealing orchid and that it was recorded in the collection of 1,000 herbs. Only Ji Tianqing didn't say anything. The corner of his mouth even hooked up in a playful smile. Han Qiusheng saw his expression and called out his name. "Ji Tianqing, tell me, what is the name of this herb? What are its characteristics and effects?" Chapter 109. Hearing this, the disciples all revealed gloating smiles. Shi Jingqing and Ji Ling even laughed and teased Ji Tianqing. "Deacon Han, did you forget? Ji Tianqing was punished by you to sweep the floor. These 7 days, he woke up early and worked late every day to clean." "That's right. Deacon Han, Ji Tianqing definitely can't answer your question. His mind must be filled with sweeping and weeding right now." Ji Tianqing glanced at Ji Ling and Shi Jingqing with a cold expression. A hint of contempt flashed in his eyes. Then, he turned to look at Han Qiusheng and said calmly, "Deacon Han, this herb isn't spirit sealing orchid, but return to heaven imperial court." Hearing Ji Tianqing's answer, before Han Qiusheng could say anything, the disciples all frowned. Return to Heaven Imperial Court. It's clearly Spirit Sealing Orchid. Is he blind? What kind of lousy name is this? I've never heard of it. I've memorized all 3,520 herbs recorded in the 1,000 Medicine Collection. There's definitely no herb called Return to Heaven Imperial Court. Hee, looks like Ji Tianqing's brain was muddled from sweeping and made up a name, right? Look at his serious appearance. If I wasn't familiar with the 1,000 Medicine Collection, I would have been fooled by him. Humph, just wait and see. He dares to fool Deacon Han like this. He won't have a good ending. Shi Jingqing, EMO, and Ji Ling secretly sneered. They looked at Ji Tianqing with eyes full of ridicule and pity. Han Qiusheng still looked at Ji Tianqing with a calm expression and asked again, Ji Tianqing, everyone knows this herb and believes that it's Spirit Sealing Orchid. Are you sure this is Return to Heaven Imperial Court? Have you carefully observed it? I hope you think carefully before answering. Ji Tianqing ignored everyone's sneers and nodded firmly. Deacon Han, this disciple is sure that this is Return to Heaven Imperial Court. Good, then tell us about its characteristics and effects. Han Qiusheng's eyes flashed with an inexplicable smile. Ji Tianqing said with a normal expression, Return to Heaven Imperial Court usually grows on mountain peaks above 3,000 meters. It's covered by snow and white clouds. It has the effect of refining the soul and promoting spiritual sense. Although its appearance is very similar to Spirit Sealing Orchid, even many alchemy masters would mistake it if they didn't look carefully. It is indeed different from Spirit Sealing Orchid. The roots of the Spirit Sealing Orchid are milky white and grow outwards, while the roots of the Heaven Returning Palace are snow white and converge inwards. Han Qiusheng quietly, he listened to Ji Tianqing's narration. The expressions of Shi Jingqing, EMO, Ji Ling, and the other disciples changed drastically. In the beginning, everyone was sure that Ji Tianqing was talking nonsense, and they all looked like they were waiting to see a good show. But when they heard Ji Tianqing speak with assurance and reason, the sneers on their faces disappeared. When they heard the last part, everyone looked at each other in dismay. Their eyes were filled with shock and doubt. No way. How can this guy talk nonsense so clearly and logically? It shouldn't be. That's clearly Spirit Sealing Orchid. What Return to Heaven Imperial Court? It's not recorded in the 1,000 Medicine Collection. This kid can't be telling the truth, right? Don't worry, Deacon Han hasn't announced the results yet. What bullshit Return to Heaven Imperial Court? It's not recorded in the 1,000 Medicine Collection at all. Why would Deacon Han use this to test us? Everyone whispered to each other, feeling a little uneasy. Finally, Ji Tianqing's Return to Heaven Imperial Court and Spirit Sealing Orchid was calm and confident. The hall fell silent. Han Qiusheng put down the herbs in his hand and actually stood up. He looked down at Ji Tianqing with a gratified smile on his face and actually clapped his hands. Good. Very good. Very good. Han Qiusheng said 3 words in a row, which made Shi Jingqing, EMO, Ji Ling, and the others dumbfounded on the spot. They were completely stunned. Several disciples' faces changed as they stared at Ji Tianqing in disbelief. Han Qiusheng's voice was as loud as a bell as he said, Ji Tianqing, what you said is completely correct. You even said what I wanted to say without missing a single word. You're very diligent. This origin pill is the reward you deserve. After that, he took out a dark red pill from the black cloth bag and flicked it to Ji Tianqing. Ji Tianqing took the origin pill with a smile and bowed to Han Qiusheng. Thank you, Deacon Han. Han Qiusheng waved his hand with a smile and said, Don't thank me. You earned this with your own efforts and knowledge. After that, he looked at Shi Jingqing, EMO, and the others with a solemn expression and said in a deep voice, Although I asked you to learn the 1,000 Medicine Collection, you can all recite it backwards. But people who only know how to memorize, don't observe and learn, and can't draw inferences from one case, don't deserve to be called geniuses. I asked you to learn how to identify herbs. Did you only look at the 1,000 medicine collection? Don't you know to look at more ancient books on herbs? In the future, when you roam the world and meet enemies who use martial skills you've never seen before, are you going to sit and wait for death? If you don't even understand this principle, then why do you cultivate martial arts? Go home, farm, and have children as soon as possible. All the disciples were reprimanded so harshly by Han Qiusheng that they all looked ashamed and lowered their heads, not daring to look at Han Qiusheng. Shi Jingqing, Emo, and Ji Ling, on the other hand, were the ones who had been jumping around the most and mocking Ji Tianqing. Now, however, their expressions were the ugliest. Among the 10 disciples, Shi Jingqing and Emo were the most confident. However, both of them recognized the wrong herb and even swore that it was the spirit-sealing orchid. In the end, Ji Tianqing, who was mocked by them, recognized the returning heaven imperial and pointed out the difference between this herb and the spirit-sealing orchid. To Shi Jingqing and Emo, who boasted that they were proficient in alchemy, this was the greatest insult. Both of them clenched their fists as the flames of anger and humiliation surged in their hearts. They hated Ji Tianqing so much that they gnashed their teeth. If Ji Tianqing didn't give the answer and show off in front of everyone, they wouldn't have been reprimanded by Deacon Han like this. Therefore, the two of them naturally had to blame this on Ji Tianqing. After Han Qiusheng reprimanded all the disciples, he opened his mouth and announced, "In the following week, everyone's task is to learn how to concoct herbs and how to match pill formulas and herbs." Duwu hurriedly walked into the main hall and took out 10 ancient books as thick as bricks and distributed them to everyone. On the cover of that black ancient book, there were 3 large words, 1,000 Directions Gathering, written on it. Han Qiusheng said in a deep voice, "In this week, everyone can refer to the 1,000 Directions Gathering to learn. A week later, this seat will assess again." Saying that, he brought Duwu and left the main hall. All the disciples held on to the 1,000 Directions Gathering, but their hearts were filled with mixed feelings. Shi Jingqing and Emo, in particular, were glaring coldly at Ji Tianqing, as if they were burning with rage. Seeing Ji Tianqing about to turn and leave the main hall, Shi Jingqing walked up with a black face and blocked his path. "Ji Tianqing. Don't think that you can hold your head high just because you guessed a herb correctly and received Deacon Han's reward. So what if you know how to identify herbs? Wait until the end of the month assessment and you'll have to start refining pills. At that time, I'll definitely trample you under my feet." Emo also walked in front of him, his face filled with anger as he coldly shouted, "Ji Tianqing, don't be complacent. The future is long. You little thief who stole the spirit fruit, sooner or later you'll be kicked out of the storm courtyard." Ji Tianqing was in a good mood and was in a hurry to rush back to his room to take the Chaoyuan pill and improve his cultivation. Shi Jingqing and Emo suddenly showed up and scolded him without giving him any chance to explain. His face suddenly became gloomy, his eyes coldly glanced at the two and sneered, I have no enmity with the two of you, but you're insulting me for no reason. Were the two of you bitten by a mad dog when you were young and contracted the mad dog disease, so you bite everyone you see?" Chapter 110. Shi Jingqing and Emo were so angry that their lungs were about to explode. They stared at Ji Tianqing with livid faces. "Ji Tianqing, how dare you insult me? You damn bastard, I'm going to teach you a lesson." Both of them were bursting with anger and fighting spirit. They clenched their fists and were about to teach Ji Tianqing a lesson. Ji Tianqing was not afraid at all. He sneered, a mad dog is indeed a mad dog. You're angry out of shame and you want to fight." Shi Jingqing and Emo could no longer hold back their anger. They waved their fists and smashed at Ji Tianqing. "Ji Tianqing, you're courting death. Bastard, get down on the ground." They besieged Ji Tianqing from both sides. Their fists were shining with the light of true essence, blowing a violent wind. Ji Tianqing's figure flashed and dodged Shi Jingqing's attack. He was about to use his palm to meet Emo's fist. At this moment, Niehao suddenly appeared beside him. With a deep shout, he threw a punch at Emo. Their fists collided with each other, making a muffled sound and exploding violent chi. Niehao stood still and did not step back. Emo, however, was pushed back 3 steps. 2 against 1. What kind of man are you? Fight me one-on-one if you have the guts. Niehao stared at Emo indifferently. His whole body was surging with a strong fighting spirit. Emo frowned and looked at him. A hint of fear flashed through his eyes. He shouted angrily, Niehao, it's none of your business. Get out of my way. Shi Jingqing also stared at Niehao angrily. He sneered, Niehao, you're meddling in other people's business. Do you want to be our enemy? Niehao did not care about their threats at all. He waved his fist with a sneer, Ji Tianqing is my friend. If you want to bully him, ask my fist first. You. Niehao. Let's wait and see. Shi Jingqing and Emo were furious. They glared at Niehao and left the hall unwillingly. Ji Tianqing's eyes flashed with a cold light as he watched the two leave. He turned his head to look at Niehao and nodded with a smile. Niehao, thank you for your help. Niehao smiled and waved his hand, Brother Ji doesn't need to thank me. In fact, with Brother Ji's strength, even if I didn't make a move, the two of them wouldn't be able to do anything to you. Ji Tianqing only smiled faintly and declined to comment. The two exchanged a few pleasantries before they left the conference hall and returned to their respective rooms. After returning to his room, Ji Tianqing entered the secret chamber and took out the Chaoyuan pill to examine it carefully. This dark red Xian core contained surging yuan qi and emitted a bright red light. This pill was refined by the Sky Pillar sex alchemists. It was absolutely impossible to buy it in a mundane kingdom. Its effects were extremely powerful, and consuming one pill could increase one's cultivation by a year. Of course, the effects of the Chaoyuan pill would be the best the first time. After that, the effects would be greatly reduced. If one consumed more than 4 Chaoyuan pills, they would completely lose their effects. Ji Tianqing held the Chaoyuan pill in his hand and thought to himself, I didn't expect Administrator Han to take out the returning Heaven Imperial Court, which isn't recorded in the 1000 medicine collection, to test everyone. Fortunately, when I helped the stinky old man collect the herbs, I recognized many herbs that aren't in the 1000 medicine collection. Otherwise, I would have been stumped just now and wouldn't have been able to obtain this Chaoyuan pill. It seems that although I worked very hard in the Great Peace Palace, I was able to learn a lot of things. Thinking about it this way, Ji Tianqing felt that the suffering he had gone through in the Great Peace Palace was worth it. He finally had his reward. After collecting his thoughts, he consumed the Chaoyuan pill and began to circulate his energy to refine the medicinal effects. When the Chaoyuan pill entered his stomach, it was catalyzed by his true essence and immediately emitted surging heat waves that surged through his limbs and bones. Ji Tianqing hurriedly circulated his energy and guided the medicinal effects into his meridians. They turned into majestic true essence and gathered in the sword embryo. Time passed quietly, and his power was also increasing rapidly. Unknowingly, an entire day had passed. Ji Tianqing finally completely refined the Chaoyuan pill. His cultivation had increased by about 4 times, and the sword embryo in his body had also doubled in size. The powerful effects of the Chaoyuan pill allowed his strength to reach the 6th level of the true essence realm. Ji Tianqing finished his cultivation and walked out of the secret chamber. Only then did he realize that it was already the morning of the next day. The morning sun had just risen. The faint morning light scattered over the storm courtyard, reflecting the dew on the flowers and leaves, refracting a dazzling brilliance. Yesterday, I was cultivating in the secret chamber and didn't go to the Great Peace Palace for the entire day. The stinky old man is definitely going to flip out. Ji Tianqing frowned and hurriedly left the storm courtyard. He brought the 1000 Directions village and hurried to the Great Peace Palace. An hour later, he walked more than 10 miles and finally arrived at the Great Peace Palace. The middle-aged mute guarding the entrance of the Great Peace Palace already knew him after a week. After seeing Ji Tianqing, the middle-aged mute nodded his head in greeting and squeezed out a stiff smile. However, the middle-aged mute's face was full of scars from sabers and swords. His eyes were fierce and full of killing intent. That stiff smile of his looked very frightening. Ji Tianqing cupped his hands in greeting and hurriedly stepped through the door into the Great Peace Palace. After entering the third courtyard, he picked up the broom and bamboo basket and obediently cleaned the courtyard. While cleaning, he didn't forget to flip through the Thousand Directions village and study the contents of the book. Fortunately, an entire morning had passed and Xiang Wuji still hadn't appeared. In the afternoon, it was the hottest time of the day. Ji Tianqing threw down the broom and bamboo basket and sat in the shade under the eaves to rest. He focused on reading the book. Just as he was engrossed in reading, light footsteps suddenly came from the courtyard entrance. There was also a young girl's voice calling out. "Grandmaster! I've come to visit you." The young girl's voice was very pleasant and her tone was gentle and pleasant. Most importantly, Ji Tianqing felt that this voice was somewhat familiar. He hurriedly put away the Thousand Directions village and raised his head to look at the courtyard entrance. He saw a young girl about 16 or 17 years old, wearing a long green dress, walking into the courtyard with a box of food. That young girl had a graceful figure and a pure and beautiful face. Under her neat bangs were a pair of large watery eyes. Her bright eyes and white teeth were very pleasant. She walked into the courtyard with the box of food. Her steps were light and graceful, and she had an innate gentle and demure temperament. When Ji Tianqing saw her clearly, he was stunned. "Junior sister Xian Xian. Why are you here?" Clearly, that young girl in the green dress was Xian Xian. When she saw Ji Tianqing sitting under the eaves, she also revealed a puzzled and surprised expression. "Tianqing. I've come to visit Grandmaster. Why are you here?" As she spoke, she glanced at the broom and bamboo basket beside Ji Tianqing. Seeing that the bamboo basket was filled with fallen leaves, weeds, and dust, she instantly understood. "Tianqing, you're here to help Grandmaster clean the courtyard? You're really considerate." Ji Tianqing smiled awkwardly and was about to explain. At this moment, Xiang Wuji's voice suddenly came from behind him. "Little Xian Xian, do you think this kid is so diligent to help me sweep the floor? He's here because he made a mistake." Chapter 111. As he spoke, Xiang Wuji walked out of one of the rooms. He was still wearing his long purple robes. His snow-white hair and beard were stained with bits of medicinal herbs and powder. Even though he was not polite to Ji Tianqing, his gaze when he looked at Xian Xian was full of affection. His wrinkled face was full of smiles. "Ah! Being punished to sweep the floor." Xian Xian looked with surprise at Ji Tianqing. She wanted to laugh when she saw Ji Tianqing's gloomy expression, but she held it in. She walked under the eaves with the food box and bowed to Xiang Wuji. She said with a slight smile, "Grandmaster, this is the dessert that Xian Xian personally made for you. Please try it." Xiang Wuji smiled even more happily. He hurriedly took the food box and said with a gratified expression, "Aya, of the juniors in the sect, little Xian Xian is the most sensible. Not only do you often come to visit this old man, you also bring gifts for this old man. This old man likes to eat the desserts that little Xian Xian makes." Xian Xian gave a faint smile and hurriedly explained, "Grandmaster. It is not that the Shixiang and Shiji are not willing to visit you. It is that you do not allow them to come to Great Palace to avoid disturbing your peace." Xiang Wuji's smile disappeared and he frowned. He said exasperatedly, "Humph. Those little brats say they are coming to visit this old man. Which one of them is not thinking about this old man's spirit medicines and treasures? All of them pretend to be gentlemen. Do you think they can hide their intentions from this old man? They are so young yet they do not cultivate and always want to take shortcuts. This old man scolding them is already light. Xian explained with a slight smile, and this caused Xiang Wuji's anger to dissipate. Then Xiang Wuji took the food box and turned to enter the room. Xian did not follow him into the room. She sat on the stone bench under the eaves and asked Ji Tianqing with a slight smile, "Tianqing, you have just entered the sect a few days ago. How did you make a mistake and be punished to sweep grate and palace? Is it because you do not understand the rules of the sect and committed some taboo?" Ji Tianqing looked at her clear eyes and could feel her worry and concern. He had no doubt that if he told her that he had been framed, Xian would be even more worried. Thinking of this, he did not explain anything. He only nodded and said, "Yes, after all, I'm new here. But now, I know what I'm doing. I won't do it again." "Yes, I believe you." Xian smiled and nodded. She saw the 1,000 directions set in Ji Tianqing's hands and asked, "Did Attendant Han ask you to learn pill recipes and concoct medicine again?" "That's right," Ji Tianqing nodded and said, "I have to learn how to concoct medicine this week and take the alchemy assessment at the end of the month." Xian's beautiful eyes turned. She said with a slight smile, "You have to clean grate and palace and learn the 1,000 directions said at the same time. I'm afraid you will not be able to do it. If you have any questions, you can ask me. I can help you answer them. I learned all this back then." Ji Tianqing smiled and cupped his hands. "If that's the case, then I'll have to thank junior apprentice sister Xian. It's nothing." Xian nodded and smiled gently. At this time, Xiang Wuji walked out of the room and came to Xian's side. "Little Xian, come and let Grandmaster take a look at your illness. How is your recovery?" Xian nodded obediently and stretched out her right hand. Xiang Wuji stretched out 2 fingers and placed them on her wrist, helping her check her pulse. Ji Tianqing stood to the side and watched silently. His heart was complicated and many thoughts flashed through his mind. Junior apprentice sister Xian looks so gentle and kind. How can she be ill? Her body is unwell and she is ill, but she still cares for me so much. After a while, Xiang Wuji retracted his fingers and a gratified smile appeared on his face. "Yes, not bad. In this half a month, little Xian, you have more or less recovered. The extreme cold poison has also been completely removed. I really didn't expect that this old man's herb garden would have so many spirit herbs and miraculous medicines, but none of them could cure your illness. However, the red star flower is compatible with your natal attribute. It can remove the extreme cold poison in your body and prevent you from being tortured by it in the future." Hearing Xiang Wuji's words, Ji Tianqing's expression changed and a flash of light flashed across his eyes. Many thoughts flashed through his mind and he finally understood. So, junior apprentice sister Xian's illness is due to the extreme cold poison in her body and the red star flower can help her get rid of it. This means that when Yunyao obtained the red star flower's stamen, she used it to treat junior apprentice sister Xian's illness. Both Xian and I have consumed the red star flower and our bodies have been transformed by the red star flower's medicinal power. No wonder when I first met her, I felt an inexplicable sense of closeness. So, the two of us are fated to be together." Ji Tianqing finally understood the reason. He also vaguely guessed that Xian and Yunyao must have a close relationship. After checking on Xian's condition, Xiang Wuji gave a few more instructions and turned around to get busy in the alchemy room. He originally wanted Xian to go to the alchemy room with him and help him look after the alchemy furnace and learn alchemy at the same time. However, Xian found an excuse to reject him. After Xiang Wuji left, Xian stayed in the courtyard to accompany Ji Tianqing and help him explain the contents of the 1,000 Directions book. With Xian's help, Ji Tianqing did not need to flip through the 1,000 Directions book and saved a lot of time. As he cleaned the courtyard, he listened to Xian Xian's explanation of alchemy and learned more deeply and thoroughly. He was also in a good mood. Unknowingly, an afternoon passed. After the sun set, Ji Tianqing and Xian Xian walked out of the Great Palace side by side and were about to return to their respective residences. However, just as the two of them reached the entrance of the Great Palace, they were stopped by a handsome young man in a white robe. This handsome young man was Lu Mingyang, who had just entered the inner sect. Lu Mingyang held a sandalwood box in his hands, and it was obvious that he had been waiting outside for a long time. When he saw Xian Xian walk out of the door, he immediately welcomed her with a face full of smiles. Just as he was about to speak, he suddenly saw Ji Tianqing, who was beside Xian Xian. Seeing Ji Tianqing and Xian Xian talking and laughing as they walked side by side, the smile on his face instantly froze and his eyes turned gloomy. At this time, Ji Tianqing and Xian Xian also saw Lu Mingyang and stopped in their tracks. The two of them did not speak as they calmly looked at Lu Mingyang. Lu Mingyang retracted the coldness in his eyes and hurriedly revealed a gentle smile as he said to Xian Xian, "Xian Xian, I knew that you came to the Great Palace today and specially came here to wait for you. This is the 1,000 years fire jade that I spent a lot of time and effort to collect. Even if it cannot help you get rid of the cold poison, it can help you reduce your pain. Xian Xian, this is my kind intentions, you must accept it." Lu Mingyang fawned over Xian Xian, and his tone and expression showed that he was extremely concerned. However, Xian Xian was indifferent to his words. After Lu Mingyang finished speaking, she then calmly said, "Take it back, I will not accept your gift. Moreover, the cold poison in my body has already been removed, you don't have to worry about it." Saying this, she turned her head to look at Ji Tianqing and smiled as she said goodbye and quickly left. Chapter 112. Xian Xian's cold attitude made the smile on Lu Mingyang's face freeze. He looked at Xian Xian's back as she left, and the expression on his face slowly turned cold. Recalling Ji Tianqing and Xian Xian walking side by side, talking and laughing, the anger in his heart burned even more. When Xian Xian's back disappeared at the end of the tree-lined path, Lu Mingyang suddenly turned around and glared at Ji Tianqing coldly. "Ji Tianqing. How do you know Xian Xian? And you're so close to her?" His expression and eyes were very gloomy, and his tone was cold and angry. Ji Tianqing glanced at him and said expressionlessly, "What? We're all from the same sect, isn't it normal for us to know each other?" "Normal my ass." Lu Mingyang's face was livid, and he completely tore off his gentle and refined disguise, and cursed in anger. "I think you have ulterior motives, and purposely got close to Xian Xian." As he spoke, he took 2 steps forward in front of Ji Tianqing, and shouted with a ferocious face, "Ji Tianqing, I'm warning you, stay away from Xian Xian in the future. You're just a trash from a broken country, you don't have the qualifications to get close to Xian Xian, you don't even have the qualifications to stand beside her. If you dare to pester Xian Xian in the future, I won't be polite to you." Lu Mingyang's tone was incomparably arrogant, and he clenched his fists, almost unable to suppress the anger in his heart. But Ji Tianqing still looked at him indifferently, and only after he finished speaking, did he reveal a contemptuous sneer. "Lu Mingyang. Whether I have the qualifications to be friends with Xian Xian, it has nothing to do with you. So what if you're the prince of Changfeng country? Xian Xian and I hit it off at first sight, and we talk happily, but she doesn't care about you. Even if you try your best to please Xian Xian, but she doesn't have any good feelings for you. In her eyes, you're no different from the dirt and weeds on the roadside. Only a shameless fellow like you would be so thick-skinned and shameless as to pester her. Can't you tell that Xian Xian hates you? You're already an adult. How can you be so shameless? Don't you know what shame is?" Listening to Ji Tianqing's words that didn't contain a single curse word, yet every single word was heart-wrenching. Lu Mingyang was immediately enraged, and his eyes were bloodshot. "Ah! Ji Tianqing. You're fucking courting death. Lu Mingyang could no longer hold back his anger. With a roar, he waved his fists and smashed them toward Ji Tianqing. Ji Tianqing sneered contemptuously and immediately retreated. However, Lu Mingyang was a LV1 Tongxian realm martial artist after all. His fists were surging with crimson fire True Yuan, bursting with a violent force. Ji Tianqing's retreating speed slowed down a bit, and his chest was swept by the fist's qi, and a large part of his robe was scorched by the flame True Essence. If his speed was any slower, he would have been injured by Lu Mingyang on the spot. Ji Tianqing. Today, I'm going to break your legs. Lu Mingyang sneered with a ferocious face, and once again threw his fists at Ji Tianqing. Ji Tianqing's face was solemn, and a cold light surged in his eyes. Even though he had reached LV6 True Energy Realm, without the Black Dragon Sword, he was still no match for Lu Mingyang. At this critical moment, he could only use his trump card and activate the sword qi in his body. Swoosh swoosh swoosh. 6 streaks of dark golden sword qi flew out from his palms, and instantly split into 12 streaks. They circled around his body and formed a sword net. Swoosh swoosh swoosh. The dense golden sword qi and sword light enveloped a 3-meter radius around him, making a sharp piercing sound. Lu Mingyang's fists smashed into the sword net, and the crimson fire True Yuan blasted a large hole in the sword net, and several streaks of sword qi were sent flying. Those dark golden sword qi pierced Lu Mingyang's fists, but were unable to hurt him. Ha ha ha. Little bastard, continue to be arrogant. Now do you know the difference between True Energy Realm and Mystic Realm? If you know what's good for you, kneel down and beg for mercy. Lu Mingyang swung his fists at the sword net, and sneered at Ji Tianqing. Ji Tianqing's face was as cold as ice. He clenched his teeth and silently controlled the sword net to block Lu Mingyang's fierce attacks. Bang bang bang. A series of muffled noises burst out one after another as Lu Mingyang blasted out large holes in the sword net of flowing light. Ji Tianqing was forced to retreat, and his face was getting paler and paler. Finally, after 36 consecutive punches, Lu Mingyang roared and used his ultimate move. Raging Flame Fist. Dazzling flames surged out of his body, and he gathered all his power on his fists, forming 2 balls of crimson fire, and punched towards Ji Tianqing. With a muffled bang, the sword net was shattered by the 2 balls of scarlet flames. Ji Tianqing did not have time to dodge, and was about to be hit by the 2 balls of crimson fire. At this critical moment, a dark green sword aura flew out from Great and Palace, and quickly arrived between the two of them. Phew! That 2-meter-long green sword aura carried a terrifying power, and instantly hit Lu Mingyang's fists. Ji Tianqing only saw a green light flash in front of his eyes, and heard a bang sound. Then he saw Lu Mingyang being sent flying. Lu Mingyang drew an arc in the air, and fell into the forest 5 meters away. He rolled a few times before coming to a stop. He struggled a few times before crawling out of the forest. Blood flowed from the corner of his mouth, his hair was messy, and his white robe was stained with mud. He looked very pathetic. He looked at Great and Palace with fear, and then staggered away. But before he left, he glared at Ji Tianqing with hatred. He clearly remembered this grudge, and would definitely find a chance to take revenge in the future. Ji Tianqing looked at Lu Mingyang's retreating figure. His face darkened, and he secretly clenched his fists. He knew very well that if the stinky old man had not saved him at the critical moment, he would have been injured by Lu Mingyang. At this moment, his heart was filled with a strong desire to become stronger. No matter what, he had to increase his strength and reach the mystic comprehending state as soon as possible. Swoosh! A green light flashed, and Xiang Wuji suddenly flew out from Great and Palace, and landed beside Ji Tianqing. Ji Tianqing came to his senses, and hurriedly bowed. He said sincerely, "Thank you for saving me, senior." Xiang Wuji did not reply. He glared at him angrily, and scolded, "You little bastard, you are really stupid. You are infuriating me. Such a miraculous sword chi, but you used it so crudely and crudely. What a waste of such a great talent. And your family's sword art, called the 10 Mystery Sword Art, don't use it in the future. Ji Tianqing looked at Xiang Wuji innocently. He didn't know why this old man was looking at him with such disappointment. What are you looking at? Xiang Wuji glared at him again, and scolded, don't go back to the Wind Cloud courtyard tonight. Come with me, I will teach you 2 sword arts. Begging for recommendation tickets, begging to be added to the bookshelf, please everyone. Chapter 113. Stupid old man wants to teach me swordsmanship. Ji Tianqing was stunned. He could not believe it. Xiang Wuji had always been strict with him. He would scold him if he did not get his way. If Xiang Wuji could talk to him nicely, he would be thanking the heavens. He did not expect that Xiang Wuji would take the initiative to teach him swordsmanship. Although he was not sure of Xiang Wuji's identity, he had seen Xiang Wuji's moves. They were truly mysterious and unheard of. How could he not be surprised and excited that such a mysterious expert was going to teach him swordsmanship? What are you waiting for? Come in quickly. Xiang Wuji walked into Great Peace Palace with his hands behind his back and shouted impatiently. Ji Tianqing regained his senses and hurried into the Great Peace Palace. He followed Xiang Wuji into the 3rd courtyard. The sky was already dark and night was about to fall. Xiang Wuji stood in the middle of the courtyard. His feet stepped on the limestone floor and he exuded a mysterious and powerful aura. Kid, I am going to teach you the Flying Star Sword technique. This sword technique has a total of 9 moves. When practiced to the extreme, it has the power to split the sky and split the earth. Hearing this, Ji Tianqing's eyes lit up, revealing a look of anticipation. Senior, have you practiced this sword chi before? Is the Flying Star Sword technique also a sword technique to control sword chi? Xiang Wuji glanced at him and said in a low voice, of course, I did not have the opportunity to practice the sword chi in your body. Otherwise, I would have broken through the shackles and entered a higher realm. The Flying Star Sword technique that I am going to teach you is a sword technique that I created in 20 years. It is used to control sword radiance. Although only Primal Core Realm experts can practice and use the Flying Star Sword technique, your sword chi is very special. However, your sword chi is very special, so you can also cultivate this sword technique. After hearing his explanation, Ji Tianqing was enlightened. He nodded to show that he understood. He thought to himself, it seems that the stupid old man has heard of the way of the sword that I practice. He just did not have the opportunity to practice it. My Tao of the Sword Heart is even more miraculous than ordinary martial arts. With my strength at the true energy stage, I can actually cultivate a Yuan Dan stage sword technique. If I can master the Flying Star Sword Art, I will definitely be stronger than an ordinary martial artist using the Flying Star Sword Art. At this moment, Xiang Wuji said seriously, Kid, I'll teach you the first 2 moves of the Flying Star Sword technique tonight. As for the remaining 7 moves, it will depend on your comprehension ability before I decide whether to teach them to you. You have to open your eyes wide and watch carefully. This old man will only display it once. Whether or not you can master it will depend on your talent and comprehension ability. Ji Tianqing immediately restrained his thoughts and did not dare to think about it anymore. He stared at Xiang Wuji with his eyes wide open, afraid that he would miss some moves in the dark. Xiang Wuji stood there with a serious expression for a moment. He secretly activated the true Yuan in his body and prepared to practice the Flying Star Sword Art. An incomparably majestic true essence rushed through his body, and it actually emitted a thunderous rumbling sound. Obviously, its power was extremely terrifying. Brat, watch carefully. First move, Thousand Feather Blade. Xiang Wuji suddenly roared and waved his hands, sending out 3 dark green sword lights. As his hands danced, he formed a sword seal and drew a mysterious arc in the air, and the 3 green sword lights also danced in the air. Swoosh swoosh swoosh. The 3 streaks of green sword light dispersed and launched an incomparably swift and fierce attack from different angles and directions. Although the 3 sword lights danced within 10 meters of him, each sword light's attack path and trajectory were different, leaving behind a trail of green light in the night. As Xiang Wuji's hands moved, the 3 sword lights attacked continuously in mid-air at the speed of lightning. All of a sudden, with Xiang Wuji as the center, a radius of 10 meters was illuminated by the dazzling sword aura, filled with crisscrossing green flowing light. In just 5 breaths, the 3 sword lights attacked from different angles and directions over 1,000 times. Ji Tianqing's eyes widened in shock, and his heart raced. He felt that this was unbelievable. In 5 breaths, the 3 sword lights attacked over 1,000 times. No wonder this move is called Thousand Feather Blade. No matter how strong the opponent is, he can't block over 1,000 attacks in 5 breaths. He will definitely be shredded into pieces by the sword lights. The power of this Thousand Feather Blade is too terrifying. The Flying Star sword art is indeed powerful. At the same time, Xiang Wuji finished practicing the Thousand Feather Blade. The 3 green sword lights flew back to him and quietly floated in the air. Xiang Wuji turned to Ji Tianqing and shouted, "Brat, did you see it clearly? I will give you 100 breaths to remember and analyze." Ji Tianqing didn't speak. He closed his eyes and silently recalled. Every movement and detail of Xiang Wuji's Thousand Feather Blade appeared in his mind one by one. After a full 100 breaths, over 1,000 images appeared in his mind, and he finally remembered all the details of the Thousand Feather Blade. Just as he opened his eyes and was about to speak, Xiang Wuji growled again. "Brat, look carefully. The second move, Wind and Thunder Strike." Xiang Wuji waved his hands again. His index and middle fingers closed together to form a sword technique. He drew a mysterious path in front of him. The 3 green sword lights in front of him suddenly turned into 2 and became even bigger. They were at least 2 meters long. Swoosh, swoosh. The 2 huge sword auras flew out 10 meters away and slashed at the ground from mid-air, erupting with an incomparably terrifying power. At that moment, the 2 sword lights shone brightly and created a violent hurricane. The entire yard was filled with sand and pebbles. Boom! A deafening noise. The blinding light and the hurricane blended together. Like a shocking thunder, the sword lights slammed into the green stone floor. Instantly, a 3-meter-wide crater appeared on the bluestone floor, with gravel and dust flying everywhere. The terrifying power traveled into the ground and caused the entire yard to shake violently. It was as if there was an earthquake. In the blink of an eye, the 2 green sword lights flew back to Xiang Wuji and disappeared into his palms. He had finished practicing the second move, Wind and Thunder Strike. Even though this move was simpler and more violent than the Thousand Feather Blade, its power was even more terrifying. Ji Tianqing stared dumbfoundedly at the huge pit in the courtyard and the dust that filled the air. His heart was filled with shock. He silently fantasized about when he could reach such a level of power. One sword move could shake the earth. At this time, Xiang Wuji turned around and walked back under the eaves. Seeing his face full of shock and yearning, he said indifferently, "You're right. I don't want to destroy my own yard. I only use 10% of my power. Study it well. After 100 breaths, show it to me." Chapter 114. 10% of his power is already so terrifying. Ji Tianqing's expression changed as he became even more shocked. If the stinky old man uses all his power, wouldn't he be able to level the entire Great Palace in the blink of an eye? This is too terrifying. Just what realm has his strength reached? Origin Core Realm? Or the legendary Heaven Origin Realm? After a while, he finally calmed down. He did not dare to let his imagination run wild. He hurriedly closed his eyes to comprehend the wind and thunder strike. While the wind and thunder strike is not as complicated as the thousand feather blade, this sword technique focuses on the method of exerting power. Soon, 100 breaths passed. Xiang Wuji stood under the roof and looked calmly at Ji Tianqing. There was a hint of anticipation in his eyes. Ji Tianqing opened his eyes. He calmly walked to the middle of the yard and stood still. He circulated the vital essence in his body. Swish swish swish. 3 flashes of sword energy appeared in front of him. They gave off a dark gold light in the dark night. Ji Tianqing put his index and middle fingers together and formed a sword technique. He quickly waved his hands in a profound pattern to control the 3 flashes of sword energy. Swish swish swish. The sword chi made a sharp sound as it pierced through the air. It circled and danced in the air within 3 meters around him, attacking and assassinating from all directions and angles. His hands moved faster and faster, gradually leaving behind afterimages. The speed of the 3 flashes of sword energy also reached an extreme. They attacked as fast as lightning, and their angles and trajectories became more and more cunning. 10 breaths passed quickly. The 3 flashes of sword energy attacked more than 1,000 times. Ji Tianqing finished practicing the 1,000-feather blade. He had used too much vital essence and his face was slightly pale. He waved his hand and called the 3 flashes of sword energy back to his side. They floated in the air. While he used twice the time to control the sword energy to attack more than 1,000 times, he had already mastered the 1,000-feather blade. However, he had already grasped the embryonic form of the 1,000-feather blade. When he used this sword technique, it was already 60 to 70% similar. Even though his sword energy was still very weak and could not be compared to Xiang Wuji's azure sword energy. But in the future, when he was strong enough, he would be able to achieve the same effect and power as Xiang Wuji. At this moment, Xiang Wuji spoke calmly. "Kid, although you use twice the time and the power of your sword chi is somewhat weak, you have already learned the basics of this 1,000-feather blade. You managed to successfully execute the 1,000-feather blade just by watching me demonstrate it once, and you even managed to replicate it to a certain extent. As for your talent and comprehension, it's still passable." Although Xiang Wuji said that, he was actually very satisfied with Ji Tianqing. He knew very well that geniuses like Ji Tianqing, who could learn the 1,000-feather blade after only seeing it once, were rare in the Sky Pillar sect. Moreover, he had always been harsh with his words and rarely praised others. Ji Tianqing had already surpassed the majority of the Sky Pillar sect's disciples to receive his SOSO evaluation. Xiang Wuji raised his eyebrows and said expressionlessly, "All right, let's continue with the second move." The wind lightning strike seems simpler than the 1,000-feather blade, but it's actually much more profound and mysterious. Ji Tianqing also understood this point, so his expression was somewhat dignified. After taking a deep breath, he began to circulate his sword chi. Swish swish. The 3 dark golden sword chi turned into 2 and doubled in size from the size of a toothpick to the size of a dagger. Wind lightning strike. Ji Tianqing formed a sword seal with both hands and suddenly let out a low roar as he controlled the 2 sword chi to slash forward. Swish swish. The 2 sword chi flew 3 meters away, one on the left and one on the right, bursting with powerful energy as they slashed fiercely at the ground. Bang! With a dull sound, the dark golden sword chi mixed with the violent wind and struck the bluestone floor like a chopstick-sized lightning bolt. A half-meter-long crack appeared on the hard bluestone floor, and a few pieces of gravel flew out. After completing the wind lightning strike, Ji Tianqing recalled the 2 sword chi and put them back into his palms. Looking at the half-meter-long crack on the ground, he scratched his head awkwardly. After all, Xiang Wuji's wind lightning strike was extremely powerful, and it blasted a 3-meter-wide crater on the ground. On the other hand, his wind lightning strike was so weak that it only left a crack on the bluestone floor. The difference between the two of them was at least 10 times greater. The stinky old man's wind lightning strike was like a combination of wind and lightning. It caused the entire house to shake. The wind lightning he used was like the lightning in the sky, and the wind lightning I used was like a weak electric snake. I wonder how many years I will have to train hard to reach the stinky old man's level. Ji Tianqing sighed in his heart before he returned to the house and looked at Xiang Wuji anxiously. Senior, look at the wind lightning strike I used just now. Did I learn it? Xiang Wuji turned his head and stared at him. He sneered disdainfully, do you think you have learned it? It's all in appearance, but all in appearance. The wind lightning strike that I used was like the lightning in the sky, but the wind lightning strike that you used was like a fart. Ji Tianqing looked embarrassed. He could only smile embarrassedly. Humph. Xiang Wuji snorted coldly, retracting his cold smile. Then, he casually said, however, you can be considered to have learned the basics of the wind lightning strike. At least your fart is loud, unlike little Xian's grandfather. He learned it from me 3 times, but he can't even fart. Although Xiang Wuji always used farts to describe this sword technique, Ji Tianqing's attention was not on this question. Senior, who is Xian's grandfather? Of course it's the elder. Xiang Wuji replied instinctively, but he stopped halfway. He suddenly turned his head and stared at Ji Tianqing. He scolded angrily, you little bastard, are you trying to trick me? Cough cough. Definitely not. Ji Tianqing waved his hands and denied it. Alright, stop talking nonsense. Xiang Wuji frowned and warned in a deep voice, although you have learned the basics of these 2 sword techniques, you still need to practice hard in the future to increase their power. When you've mastered those 2 moves to the greater mastery realm, I'll teach you the other moves. Ji Tianqing hurriedly cupped his hands and bowed. He said sincerely, thank you senior for teaching me the sword techniques. I can't thank you enough. Xiang Wuji smiled at him and said in a mocking tone, then how are you going to thank me? How about this, you leave the storm courtyard tomorrow and stay in my great peace palace. Every day, you will clean my courtyard and take care of the herbs. Before he finished speaking, Ji Tianqing's expression changed. He pointed at the sky above his head and hurriedly said to Xiang Wuji, Senior, it's already dark. I still have matters to attend to, so I will leave first. Please rest early. After he finished speaking, he didn't care if Xiang Wuji agreed or not and ran away like a wisp of smoke. Xiang Wuji looked at his back and scolded in a joking manner, you heartless little bastard. How many people can't get this job even in their dreams? You actually disdain it. If it wasn't for the fact that the sword energy you cultivate is similar to the Kenshin art, or even very likely, I wouldn't bother with you and waste my time with you. Chapter 115. When Ji Tianqing left the Grand Peace Palace, it was already 9 in the morning. Other than the few lights in the Grand Peace Palace, the entire mountain was shrouded in the darkness of night. It was quiet and eerie. Even though this was the last time he had returned. He had spent almost 2 hours practicing the flying star sword technique. But his heart was filled with excitement and anticipation. His footsteps were much lighter. 15 minutes later, he was walking on a small tree-lined path at the foot of the mountain. There was not a single person on the path. The surrounding forest was also as dark as ink. It was deathly silent. Suddenly, 2 cold lights lit up in the forest. They shot at Ji Tianqing's head and chest like lightning. Xiu, xiu. Those 2 cold lights were hidden weapons and throwing knives. They pierced through the night sky with a sharp sound. Ji Tianqing was pondering over the 2 sword techniques he had just learned. He was suddenly awakened by the sound and his expression changed. Damn it! Someone is ambushing me. He immediately exploded with a vast amount of true essence. He moved 3 meters to the side to avoid the attack of the 2 hidden weapons. The two hidden weapons and throwing knives flew in front of him. With two dong, dong sounds, they nailed themselves into a large tree on the side of the road. The finger-long blade was completely embedded into the tree trunk. The handle was still violently vibrating. Clearly, these two hidden weapons and throwing knives contained a large amount of power. If they hit Ji Tianqing, they would definitely pierce two bloody holes. Ji Tianqing retreated to the forest on the side of the road. He hid behind a large tree that was as thick as a water bucket. Suddenly being ambushed, he was angry and puzzled. But he was still calm and did not lose his composure. He hid behind the large tree. His sharp eyes observed the forest in front of him, looking for the person who had attacked him. In the next moment, a black shadow charged out of the forest in front of him. That person was holding a treasure sword that emitted a cold light. He was charging straight at him. When he saw that black shadow, Ji Tianqing immediately frowned. His eyes flashed with cold killing intent. It's him. That night, he was the one who lured me out of the room and then framed me. Ji Tianqing instantly recognized him. This black-clothed warrior with a veil over his face was the black-clothed man from that night. Just in time. I want to see who's after me. He shouted in his heart as he secretly mobilized the true essence in his body, and a strong fighting intent burst out from his body. At the same time, the man in black rushed to the front of Ji Tianqing, less than 3 meters away. The black-clothed man leaped, jumping more than 3 meters high, waving his sword and thrusting out a dozen dazzling dark yellow sword auras, enveloping Ji Tianqing. Swish swish swish. Suddenly, the night sky around Ji Tianqing was illuminated by the sword light. Many branches and leaves were torn to shreds by the sharp sword qi. At the critical moment, he did not hesitate to use the flying star sword technique that he had just learned. Thousand Feather Blade. Ji Tianqing bellowed with a murderous aura. He suddenly shot out 3 chopstick-length dark golden sword qi towards the black-robed man. Ding 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 ding. The golden sword qi was as fast as lightning, and it clashed with the dozen or so sword projections, resulting in a series of crisp sword cries. In just a short time, the 3 golden sword qi had struck hundreds of times. It was so fast that people could not see the trajectory and route of the sword qi. The black-robed man's more than a dozen dark yellow sword projections were shattered by the sword qi on the spot, turning into little yellow light spots and dissipating. However, the power of the 1,000 Feather Blade was not limited to this. The 3 golden sword qi were still attacking at a very fast speed. Swish swish swish. In the blink of an eye, the 3 sword qi had attacked hundreds of times. The black-robed man was obviously stunned for a moment, and he hurriedly waved his sword to resist. Ding ding dang dang, after a series of collision sounds, the black-robed man's chest and abdomen were stabbed dozens of times by the sword qi. His body trembled again and again, and he let out a painful muffled groan. He fell from the air to the grass and rolled a few times before he got up. The black clothes on his chest and abdomen had been shredded to pieces by the sword qi, revealing the golden soft armor he wore underneath. Fortunately, he had the protection of the golden soft armor. Otherwise, he would have been pierced into a sieve by the sword qi. The black-robed man angrily shouted in a low voice, and unwillingly waved his sword to attack again. However, Ji Tianqing controlled the 3 sword qi, and stabbed hundreds of times in a breath. A large number of golden sword shadows surrounded the black-robed man. Moreover, he controlled the sword qi to stab the black-robed man's arms, face, and legs, which were not protected by the soft armor. The black-robed man waved his sword to resist, and could only block the sword qi that was attacking his head. After another series of ding ding dang dang sounds, the black-robed man's arms and legs were pierced with more than a dozen bloody holes by the sword qi. He half knelt on the ground, holding his sword with both hands, and panted violently. Red blood flowed out from the more than a dozen wounds, sprinkling on the lush grass. At the same time, Ji Tianqing's 1,000 Feather Blade also ended, and the 3 golden sword chi flew back to his side and floated. "Who are you? Why do you want to assassinate me?" he asked in a cold voice, and stepped closer to the black-robed man, exuding a strong murderous aura. The black-robed man did not say a word, and without hesitation, turned around and fled. His speed was as fast as an arrow, and in the blink of an eye, he entered the forest. "Don't even think about escaping." Ji Tianqing quickly chased after him, and also entered the forest. However, the night was dark, and it was difficult to tell the direction in the forest. The black-robed man had the strength of a profound understanding cultivator, and he had cultivated a high level of Qigong. He was also very familiar with the terrain, and his speed in the forest was extremely fast. Ji Tianqing had only chased for 1,000 meters before he was shaken off by the black-robed man. "Damn it! I let him escape again." In desperation, Ji Tianqing could only give up the chase, and unwillingly return to the tree-lined path. He returned to the place where he had been attacked, and took down the 2 concealed throwing knives that were nailed to the tree, and searched the nearby area. Unfortunately, other than the 2 concealed throwing knives, the black-robed man did not leave behind any clues. Ji Tianqing could only put away the 2 concealed throwing knives, and with a gloomy face, rushed back to the wind cloud courtyard. After returning to his residence, he did not even have the mood to eat dinner, and sat under the lamp, carefully examining the 2 throwing knives. However, the 2 throwing knives were only common concealed weapons, and did not have any identification, nor was there anything special about them. With just these 2 concealed throwing knives, Ji Tianqing could not find out the black-robed man's identity. He put away the throwing knives, and with a serious expression, he frowned and pondered. That black-robed man had the strength of a profound understanding cultivator, and he was very familiar with the sect's terrain, so he should be an inner disciple of the sect. He ambushed me midway, so he obviously knew my whereabouts. But other than Ji Ling and Lu Mingyang, who else wants to kill me? Luckily I had just learned the flying star sword art, or else I would not have been able to block the black-robed man's attack, and I would have most likely been assassinated by him tonight. But even if I had learned the flying star sword art, and could fight with a profound understanding cultivator, I did not cultivate a high-level Qigong, so I would not be able to catch up to that black-robed man. It looks like I need to quickly find a high-level Qigong to cultivate. The next time that black-robed man tries to assassinate me, I will be able to catch up to him, and find out his identity. Chapter 116. In the next few days, the black-clothed man didn't appear again. He was probably recuperating in secret. Ji Tianqing would sweep the floor of the Grand Peace Palace every day. He would also study the 1,000 recipe set and learn about pill formulas and medicine. At night, he would focus on cultivating the flying star sword art and pondering the mysteries of the 1,000 feather blade and wind lightning strike. In these few days, Xiang Wuji didn't appear again. Ji Tianqing also didn't know what he was busy with. Ever since that evening when she met Lu Mingyang outside the gate, Xian hadn't gone to the Grand Peace Palace. Unknowingly, 5 days had passed. Today was the 2nd week of the Tempest Courtyard's small exam. Han Qiusheng wanted to test everyone's learning results. Early in the morning, the bell rang in the Tempest Courtyard's main hall. Ji Tianqing, Nie Hao, and the others all rushed to the main hall to accept Han Qiusheng's test. The content of this test was related to pill formulas and medicine. Han Qiusheng gave each of the 10 disciples a pill formula and had Du Wu place more than 40 sets of medicinal ingredients on the table. The pill formulas in everyone's hands had all been cut down. They were all missing 2 or 3 medicinal ingredients. Han Qiusheng's test was to have everyone carefully study the pill formulas in half an incense stick's time and make up for the missing medicinal ingredients. In the end, the 10 disciples all completed the task in half an incense stick's time and made up for the missing medicinal ingredients. After Han Qiusheng checked, he announced the results of the test. Ji Tianqing, Nie Hao, Ji Ling, Emo, Shi Jingqing, and the others all completed the task without error. Only one disciple made a mistake and failed to complete the task. This disciple was reprimanded by Han Qiusheng and had a true elemental pill deducted from his monthly allowance. Every disciple of the sky-bearing sect received a certain amount of monthly allowance. This was a subsidy given by the sect to help the disciples increase their strength. Ordinary outer sect disciples only received 6 true elemental pills and 5 spirit fruits to increase their strength every month. As for the 10 genius disciples of the Tempest Courtyard, they received 10 true elemental pills and 8 spirit fruits every month. Ji Tianxing, Nie Hao, and the others had only been in the sect for half a month. They had to wait until the beginning of the next month to receive their monthly allowance. The disciple who did not complete the mission had his true elemental Dan deducted just like that, which was also very distressing. After the assessment ended, Han Qiusheng announced everyone's mission for the next half a month. Now that you've recognized the medicinal herbs, you've also understood the pill formula and the prescription. In the next half a month, everyone will study the pill formulas of the Spirit Nourishing Pill, Green Jade Pill, and Heart Nourishing Pill, and practice refining pills. There is a pill room in the outer sect that is specially provided for disciples to refine pills. Everyone can go there to practice refining pills. However, each of you will only have 3 sets of materials to refine pills, so you must understand them thoroughly and try to refine pills only when you are confident. At the end of this month, I will conduct a monthly test for all of you. At that time, you will be rewarded according to your performance. I can reveal one thing in advance. The top 3 in the monthly assessment will be rewarded, but the reward for the first place is the most generous. It will greatly affect your cultivation for the next 6 months. After speaking, Han Qiusheng had Du Wu distribute 3 sets of alchemy materials to each person. After that, Han Xiaoxing left with Du Wu. All the disciples carried their bundles of medicinal herbs and walked out of the main hall one after another. Ji Tianxing and Nie Hao exchanged a few words, and the 2 of them were the last to walk out of the main hall. When they walked into the courtyard, they saw several other disciples gathered at the entrance of the Tempest Courtyard. They seemed to be discussing something in low voices. He frowned and subconsciously muttered, "What are they doing?" Nie Hao glanced at the entrance and nodded. "Let's go take a look." The 2 of them stepped across the courtyard and walked towards the entrance. They saw a woman wearing a long white dress standing at the entrance. Although everyone could only see the woman's silhouette, they all revealed a stunned expression and their eyes revealed adoration. The woman in the white dress was like snow, and her graceful figure made people's hearts beat faster. Her beautiful cheeks were suffocating, and her long black hair hung down to her waist. She only stood quietly outside the entrance, but she had a kind of aloof and noble temperament that was aloof from the world. When the genius disciples of the Tempest Courtyard saw her, they felt ashamed of their inferiority and did not dare to approach and disturb her. Several disciples gathered together and discussed in low voices with excited expressions on their faces. "What a beautiful woman! I'm not afraid of being laughed at, but this is the first time I've seen such a peerless beauty in my life." "Yes, I feel the same way. Such a peerless beauty with an otherworldly temperament, just like a fairy from the heavens." "Hee, you are too ignorant. This beauty in white is our senior sister, the chief disciple of our courtyard, Yunyao." "Ah. She is Yunyao, the number 1 genius of the Tianjin region. Oh my God, I've heard of her reputation and deeds 2 years ago. I didn't expect to see her in person today. I'm so lucky. It's a pity that such a peerless beauty can only be seen from afar and cannot be profaned. Otherwise, I would have the courage to visit senior sister." Shi Jingcheng and Emo also gathered together. They looked at Yunyao up and down with passionate eyes, whispering to each other. "I didn't expect senior sister Yunyao to come to the outer courtyard and to our Tempest Courtyard." "Yes. I don't know why senior sister came to the Tempest Courtyard. It seems like she's here to look for someone." Sigh. "I don't know who is so lucky to be acquainted with senior sister and make her come to the Tempest Courtyard to look for him." How good would it be if the person senior sister is looking for is me? Tomorrow, I will be famous in the courtyard. I don't know how many senior and junior brothers will be jealous of me. Just as everyone was talking, Yun Yao, who was standing at the entrance, suddenly turned her head and looked into the courtyard. Her cold expression immediately became gentle and she called out in a very pleasant voice, "Junior brother Tianqing, come out for a moment." Upon hearing this, all the disciples in the courtyard were dumbfounded. Everyone was shocked and looked at Ji Tianqing in disbelief. Their eyes were full of jealousy and envy. Ji Tianqing and Nie Hao walked side by side and approached the entrance. Seeing Yun Yao standing at the entrance, he guessed that the disciples must be talking about her. But he didn't expect that Yun Yao would come to look for him and even take the initiative to greet him. He was stunned for a moment before he walked to the entrance and stood in front of Yun Yao. "Miss Yun Yao." He nodded to Yun Yao and was about to ask. Yun Yao frowned and stared at him with a playful look. Ji Tianqing came to his senses and quickly changed his words, "Senior sister, are you looking for me?" "Yes," Yun Yao said calmly, "I have something to say to you." "Do you have time?" "Of course." Ji Tianqing nodded and agreed without hesitation. Yun Yao nodded and turned to walk out. "Come with me." When the disciples in the courtyard saw Ji Tianqing leave with Yun Yao, they immediately showed expressions of envy and jealousy and whispered to each other again. "A new month has arrived. Little he is here to ask for a few recommendation tickets. He asks his brothers to add this book to their bookshelves so that they can see the latest content every day." Chapter 117. Ji Tianqing followed Yun Yao out of the storm courtyard. They were walking on a tree-lined path halfway up the mountain. This path was located deep in the forest. It was quiet and uninhabited, and very few people would pass by it. The two of them walked along the tree-lined path for 3 miles before standing under a 100-year-old tree and chatting. Yun Yao calmly looked at Ji Tianqing and asked, "You've been in the sect for half a month now. Have you adapted?" Ji Tianqing smiled lightly and nodded. "Thank you for your concern, eldest senior sister. I've already adapted to the rules of the sect and gotten used to life in the sect." Yun Yao nodded and continued, "I've heard junior sister Xian mention you before. She said you violated the sect's rules and were punished to sweep the floor of the Grand Peace Palace." Ji Tianqing was a little embarrassed and smiled embarrassedly. "Yes, Deacon Han punished me to sweep the floor for a month. Fortunately, half a month has passed." Yun Yao frowned slightly and said in a serious tone, "The Grand Peace Palace is a place that ordinary people can't enter. Other than junior sister who can enter and leave freely, even I have to get the old man's permission to enter. Junior brother Tianqing, you must be careful when you're in the Grand Peace Palace. You must not anger that old man. Otherwise, even if I want to help you, it will be difficult." That old man's identity. Hearing this, Ji Tianqing couldn't help but smile bitterly. "Senior sister, I seem to have offended that old man, and it wasn't a light offense." Yun Yao frowned and a trace of worry flashed through her eyes. "What did you do this time?" Ji Tianqing didn't dare to look directly into her big clear eyes. He turned his head to look elsewhere and said with a bitter smile, "I accidentally tore off his roof and destroyed the blue soul grass and azure spirit tree that he carefully cultivated. You." Yun Yao didn't know whether to laugh or cry. She looked at Ji Tianqing with a complicated expression. After a long time, she shook her head and sighed, Good luck to you. In the entire Sky Pillar sect, only that old man has the jade soul grass and the azure spirit tree. In the past, when I wanted to ask for a jade soul grass, I had to beg Master to come forward and ask for it. It's not easy for you to stand in front of me alive." Ji Tianqing listened to Yun Yao's helpless tone and looked at her worried face. His heart skipped a beat. "Eldest senior sister, don't worry about me. I know what I'm doing. Besides, that old man doesn't seem to be as cruel as you said." Yun Yao's beautiful eyes turned, glanced at him, and said in a strange tone, "I'm not worried about you. I just think that it would be so pitiful if you were beaten to death by that old man at such a young age." Ji Tianqing was speechless. He didn't know how to respond to her. Moreover, he had always felt that Yun Yao was a high and mighty holy fairy who was untainted by the mortal world. She was usually cold and proud. He didn't know why, but Yun Yao didn't have that kind of cold and distant aura in front of him. He thought to himself, "Is there anything special about me? How can I get Yun Yao's pleasant treatment and care?" Just as he was letting his imagination run wild, a young man in white appeared on the tree-lined path and ran over quickly. The young man in white seemed to be looking for something. When he suddenly saw Yun Yao's figure, he immediately sped up and ran over. "Eldest senior sister, I've finally found you." Bai Wuqian looked like he was in a hurry as he quickly came to Yun Yao's side. When he saw Ji Tianqing, he immediately frowned. Bai Wuqian glanced coldly at Ji Tianqing. He seemed a little unhappy. Yun Yao's expression was indifferent. She asked calmly, "Junior brother Bai, are you looking for me?" Bai Wuqian retracted his gaze from Ji Tianqing and quickly smiled at Yun Yao. "Eldest senior sister, the sect master is back. He's in the sky-raising palace. He sent you a message asking you to meet him." Yun Yao's expression softened. "Master is back. Okay, I'll go to the sky-raising palace now." Then, she turned to look at Ji Tianqing and reminded him, "Junior brother Tianqing, you must remember what I said just now." "Of course, I won't dare to forget." Ji Tianqing cupped his fists and smiled. Yun Yao nodded. Then, she turned and left with Bai Wuqian. Before leaving, Bai Wuqian turned to look at Ji Tianqing. His gaze was a little cold. Ji Tianqing's expression remained calm. No one could see any change in his expression. However, he could clearly see Bai Wuqian's expression and gaze. He already had a plan in mind. This Bai Wuqian. Since the first time I met him in Qingyun Kingdom, he seemed to have some prejudice against me. I wonder how I offended him. After standing under the tree for a while, he turned and left. After a quarter of an hour, Ji Tianqing returned to the storm courtyard. The few disciples had not returned to their rooms. They were still in the courtyard. They gathered in twos and threes and were still discussing something in low voices. Seeing Ji Tianqing return, the few disciples quieted down at the same time. They all looked at him with complicated expressions. Everyone tacitly kept quiet and watched him as he walked through the courtyard. It was not until he returned to his room that they continued to discuss. Their expressions became more and more interesting. "Humph. I don't know what kind of luck that kid has. He actually got to know eldest senior sister. How despicable. Eldest senior sister is like a goddess. How could she be friends with him?" Shi Jingcheng and Emo were so jealous that their eyes were almost red. Their hatred for Ji Tianqing deepened. The other two disciples gathered under the tree. Their faces were also filled with jealousy and indignation. "No. We have to tell eldest senior sister about that kid stealing the spirit fruit. We can't let that despicable Ji Tianqing get close to eldest senior sister." Cough cough. "Do you know eldest senior sister? Can you see her? Can you talk to her?" The person who spoke earlier did not utter a word and retreated with an awkward expression. Ji Ling sat on the stone bench under the big banyan tree. He held an ancient book in his hand and pretended to be reading. Hearing the disciples' indignant discussion, he also sneered and interjected. He, back in Qingyun Kingdom, if it wasn't for eldest senior sister's help, that kid wouldn't even have the qualifications to participate in the entrance competition." When the other disciples heard that there was gossip, they hurried to Ji Ling's side and looked at him eagerly. "Ji Ling, were you talking about Ji Tianqing? What's going on exactly? You should know about it, right? Hurry up and tell us. Don't keep us in suspense." Ji Ling seemed to like the feeling of being surrounded by everyone, like the moon surrounded by stars. The sneer on his face deepened. He glanced at Ji Tianqing's room. Then he lowered his voice and started to tell them about the entrance competition. The disciples gathered in a circle. They all listened attentively and discussed from time to time. Unknowingly, Ji Ling and the other disciples stood on the same side. They all hated Ji Tianqing. Chapter 118. Inside the Sky Pillar sect, there was a mountain called Qi Shao. This mountain was located in the center of the 9 peaks of the Sky Pillar sect and was also the core of the sect protecting array. At the top of Qi Shao Peak was a magnificent palace called the Sky Pillar Palace. At this moment, the Sky Pillar Palace was empty except for a middle-aged man in a golden robe who was sitting on the sect master's throne. This person was tall and sturdy, handsome, and naturally exuded a powerful and noble aura. Although he looked to be in his 40s, his hair was already white, and his eyes contained an aura of vicissitudes that didn't match his face. This kind of aura could only be possessed by someone who had been tempered by the vicissitudes of time. He was the current sect master of the Sky Pillar sect, a peerless powerhouse who shook the Tianqing region, Chu Tianqing. Chu Tianqing was frowning and pondering, and there was a hint of worry between his brows. At this moment, Yun Yao, who was dressed in a white dress, stepped through the door and quickly came to the main hall. She looked up at the middle-aged man on the sect master's throne and bowed respectfully. Disciple greets sect master. Only then did Chu Tianqing collect his thoughts and look at Yun Yao. He said in a low and kind voice, "Yun Yao, come here. Master has something to tell you." Yun Yao quickly stepped forward and walked to the steps of the throne, standing 3 meters away from Chu Tianqing. "Master, you just came back and summoned disciple here. Is it because of that matter?" Chu Tianqing nodded slightly and said with a worried expression, "Yes, it's because of that matter." After a pause, he said in a low voice, "Yun Yao, you are the disciple with the most potential under Master. You are also the chief disciple of the Sky Pillar sect and have been internally decided to be the next sect master. After Master abdicates in the future, you will still be in charge of the Sky Pillar sect. Therefore, Master has to tell you something so that you can be prepared." Hearing Chu Tianqing's words, Yun Yao frowned and had a bad premonition in her heart. "Master, you are at the peak of your strength, and it won't be a problem for you to be in charge of the Sky Pillar sect for another 100 years. Why are you suddenly saying such heavy words today? Could it be that matter has already affected the safety of the Sky Pillar sect?" Chu Tianqing nodded and said with a serious expression, "That's right. Yun Yao, you are really smart. Didn't you always want to ask about that matter? Today, I will tell you the truth. Listen carefully." Yun Yao understood the importance of the matter, so she no longer interjected. She listened with a solemn expression. Chu Tianqing said with a heavy tone. 1,000 years ago, a peerless demon appeared in the Tianqing region. He wreaked havoc everywhere and brought disaster to the people. That demon willfully slaughtered the innocent and destroyed countless cities, resulting in the deaths of nearly 10 million civilians. He has committed a monstrous sin of slaughter. That devil even killed his way into the ancient realm of stars and destroyed a few large sections. He slaughtered thousands of people and plundered countless treasures. Coincidentally, an otherworldly expert appeared and defeated the demon with a single sword strike, suppressing him beneath the Red Cloud Peak. At that time, our sect's founder witnessed it with his own eyes and was fortunate enough to receive guidance from that master. So, our sect's founder moved 8 mountains and placed them around the Scarlet Firmament Peak to form a sealing array. Later, our sect's founder established the Sky Pillar sect. As our sect grew stronger and stronger, we suppressed the Sky Pillar sect for generations. The deeds and legends of the Sky Pillar sect gradually disappeared. Hearing this, Yun Yao's big clear eyes were filled with shock. It was the first time she had heard of this legend. Only then did she know that the 9 mountains of the Sky Pillar sect formed not only a protective array but also a sealing array to seal the Sky Pillar sect. At this time, Chu Tianxing continued. 2 years ago, Master noticed that the sect's protective array was somewhat abnormal and found that the sealing array had been damaged. The Sky Pillar sect's founder has been sealed for thousands of years and is about to awaken. A month ago, Master brought 8 elders to the foot of the Scarlet Firmament Peak and strengthened the seal. However, the Sky Pillar sect's founder has awakened and will break the seal sooner or later. Back then, the Sky Pillar sect's founder caused a bloody storm in the Tianjin region and slaughtered millions of people. All the sects were helpless and were almost destroyed by him. If it weren't for that master, the Tianjin region would have been covered in blood and all the sects would have been destroyed. Now, if the Sky Pillar sect's founder breaks the seal, he will definitely take revenge on our sect and the Tianjin region. At that time, I'm afraid that no one will be able to resist the Sky Pillar sect's founder. The Tianjin region will also be plunged into misery and suffering. Yunyao listened carefully. Her eyes were filled with shock and worry. She frowned and asked, "Sect Master, there are 8 sects in the Star Ancient Realm now. There are countless experts and tens of thousands of elite martial artists. Can't they deal with the Sky Pillar sect's founder?" Chu Tianxing shook his head gently and smiled bitterly. "Yunyao, you haven't succeeded as the sect master, so you don't know the secrets from 1,000 years ago. You also don't know how terrifying the Sky Pillar sect's founder is. Which of the sects that were destroyed by the Sky Pillar sect 1,000 years ago wasn't stronger than our Sky Pillar sect? In the end, no one was able to stop the Sky Pillar sect's founder. Those sects were also destroyed." Yunyao frowned and asked again, "But Master, the Sky Pillar sect's founder has been sealed for 1,000 years. His strength must have decreased greatly. He's not as strong as he was at his peak." Chu Tianxing pondered for a moment with a solemn expression before he explained, "Yunyao, when you were young, I told you about the demon race. The demon race is a very mysterious and terrifying race. They are the most brutal and bloodthirsty race in the world. This race is different from us humans. They are born with stronger bodies and more outstanding cultivation talent than humans. Moreover, the cultivation methods they practice are very bloody and evil. The speed at which they increase their strength is several times faster than humans. The Sky Pillar sect's founder sealed under the Scarlet Firmament Peak can quickly increase his strength through bloody slaughter. My race absolutely can't understand that kind of strange and evil cultivation method." Yunyao nodded with a solemn expression, "Disciple understands. However, Master, don't you have any other way?" Chu Tianxing shook his head and said with a wry smile, "Apart from strengthening the seal, Master can only look for the Sky Pillar sect's founder. I hope that person can help our sect reopen the seal and seal the Sky Pillar sect's founder for another 1,000 years." Speaking up to here, Chu Tianxing asked Yunyao, "By the way, have you found the person Master asked you to look for?" Yunyao nodded and replied calmly, "We've found him. He's now in the outer sect's Tempest courtyard." Chu Tianxing's spirit shook and a gratified look appeared on his face. "Good. After Master has dealt with the sect's affairs, bring him to see me. Whether or not we can reopen the seal and seal the Sky Pillar sect's founder again in exchange for 1,000 years of peace and stability will depend on that Sky Pillar sect's founder." Chapter 119. The night was dark and there was no moon in the sky. Ji Tianqing had been busy in the Grand Peace Palace all day. When he returned to his residence in the Storm Courtyard, his stomach was rumbling with hunger. After eating dinner, he sat at the table and drank tea as he pondered over his next task. Although Deacon Han punished me to sweep the Grand Peace Palace for a month, I have already cleaned the Grand Peace Palace in this half a month. The smelly old man hasn't shown up these past few days. I won't be going to the Grand Peace Palace to work tomorrow. I have to go to the alchemy room to try refining pills. The end of the month examination is very important. If I can take first place, I will receive a very generous reward. I have to work harder. After making up his mind, Ji Tianqing drank the tea in his cup and prepared to enter the secret room to cultivate. But at this moment, a furry figure appeared from the window and a small ice blue head poked out. The small head opened a pair of silver eyes and looked around the room. Seeing that there was only Ji Tianqing in the room, it stretched out its small claws and opened the window. With a "so" sound, it flew into the room. Ji Tianqing heard the movement and subconsciously turned around. He saw the small ice blue beast flapping its wings. It was Qian Yu. He immediately frowned and asked in a low voice, Qian, why did you run back? Qian Yu quickly flew in front of him and anxiously whispered, Old Ji, the situation is not good. Let's quickly run for our lives. Ji Tianqing looked at it with a puzzled expression and unhappily asked, What are you talking about? Why do we need to run for our lives? Qian Yu said anxiously, Old Ji, I took the risk of being roasted and eaten to sneak out of the Grand Peace Palace just to inform you of my whereabouts. You have to believe me. The sky-bearing sect is about to face a great disaster. Let's quickly run. Ji Tianqing knew that Qian Yu had always been cunning and treacherous. How could he easily believe its words? Grabbing Qian Yu, Yang Kai brought it into the secret chamber, then smiled and said, All right, take your time and tell me what's going on. Speak clearly. Qian Yu hurriedly explained, Previously, when I was in the Great Peace Palace, I accidentally heard the smelly old man and a few elders discussing a secret matter. I heard them say that the Sky Pillar sect is facing a huge crisis. Soon, a disaster will descend. At that time, even the sect won't be able to protect itself, and blood will flow like rivers. The Sky Pillar sect is facing a huge crisis. Disaster is coming. Ji Tianqing's brows knitted together, and his expression was somewhat solemn. Qian, did you hear it from them? An. Qian Yu nodded solemnly. Ji Tianqing pondered for a moment and asked, Then did you hear what kind of crisis and disaster it is? Why couldn't they protect the sect? The Sky Pillar sect is the #1 sect in the heavenly stellar region. Qian Yu shook his head and said regretfully, The smelly old man placed a restriction on the 100 treasures brocade pouch. I could only vaguely hear a few words. I don't know what happened. Speaking of this, he anxiously urged, Old Ji, don't ask so much. Who cares about the disaster and crisis? Let's quickly leave the Sky Pillar sect. Saving our lives is more important. Ji Tianqing thought for a moment and shook his head. With a firm expression, he said, No, I can't leave yet. I must find the heavenly star bead. Old Ji. Qian Yu looked at him very seriously and said in a solemn tone, It's already a matter of life and death. Why are you still thinking about the heavenly star bead? Ji Tianqing also looked at him with a solemn expression and said, Qian, that thing is very important to me. I must find it. Moreover, even if the Sky Pillar sect really encounters some kind of crisis, there are so many experts in the sect. They will definitely deal with it. You only heard a few words and don't know what kind of crisis it is. When it will happen, how can we blindly run away? Qian Yu saw that Ji Tianqing's attitude was firm and that he had made up his mind not to leave. He could only helplessly sigh. Ai. Old Ji, I'll give you a heads up. Since you've decided not to leave, there's nothing I can do. In any case, when the Sky Pillar sect really is destroyed, I'll definitely run away. Ji Tianqing knocked his little head and said with a smile, Then we'll talk about it when it happens. What are you in such a hurry for now? That's right, you and the little black dragon stayed in the Great Palace for half a month. The stinky old man didn't mistreat you, right? Qian Yu curled his lips and said in a mocking tone, Do you think we're like you? We were beaten and abused by the stinky old man. Humph. I'm such a smart and cute little fellow. Anyone with a bit of compassion wouldn't have the heart to bully me. Ji Tianqing looked askance at him and said in a bad mood, when you say that, doesn't your conscience hurt? Qian Yu was speechless and could only roll his eyes at him. After a moment of silence, he continued, but to be honest, the stinky old man looks very hateful on the surface, but he's actually quite good to me and the little black dragon. During our time in the Great Palace, the stinky old man often took out many spirit fruits for us to eat to help us recover our strength. If I hadn't eaten so many spirit fruits and recovered a bit of my strength, I wouldn't have been able to hear the conversation between the stinky old man and the elders. As Ji Tianqing listened, his brows furrowed tightly. The stinky old man took the initiative to take out spirit fruits for you to eat? That's right. Qian Yu subconsciously nodded. Ji Tianqing's expression changed and he angrily cursed, "Humph. Damn stinky old man. He was clearly the one who took the initiative to give you spirit fruits. Back then, he even said that you stole his spirit fruits and caused me to willingly be punished by him. Too hateful." Qian Yu immediately covered his little mouth with his claws and giggled. His eyes were filled with schadenfreude. Ji Tianqing chatted with him for a while before urging him to quickly leave. "Qian, hurry back to the Great Palace. Don't let the stinky old man find out that you snuck out." Qian Yu waved his little claws at him before flying out of the secret room. Under the cover of the night, he quietly left the Tempest courtyard. 15 minutes later, Ji Tianqing calmed down and began to cultivate in the secret room. The vitality replenishing pill that he had taken before still had some faint effects, allowing his strength to increase at a faster rate than usual. After a night, Ji Tianqing felt that he wasn't far from the 7th level of the true element realm. Perhaps he would be able to advance next month. The next morning, he finished cultivating and walked out of the secret room. After washing up, he took out a set of ingredients for refining pills and prepared to go to the pill room to try refining pills. However, when he walked to the Tempest courtyard, he met Ji Ku at the entrance. Ji Ku had specially come to find him and had been waiting outside for a long time. Ever since Ji Tianqing entered the sky-bearing sect, he hadn't seen Ji Ku for more than half a month. Seeing that Ji Ku had come to find him, he brought Ji Ku into the Tempest courtyard and returned to his residence. Chapter 120. Ji Tianqing chatted with Ji Ku while pouring tea for her. Ji Ku curiously looked around the room, looking here and there. "Wow, big brother Tianqing, the treatment of your Tempest courtyard's disciples is really good. Not only are the rooms very spacious, but there are also secret rooms for cultivation. It's not like our White Dew courtyard where everyone only has a small room." Ji Ku looked around before sitting down at the table and looking at Ji Tianqing with envy. Ji Tianqing only smiled and asked in a gentle tone, "Ku, why did you come looking for me so early in the morning? Is something the matter?" Ji Ku glanced at him reproachfully and pretended to be annoyed. "Humph. Big brother Tianqing, I haven't seen you in half a month. Can't I come to see you?" He, of course you can." Ji Tianqing smiled and intimately patted her head. "Ku, how have you been in the past half a month? Have you gotten used to it?" Ji Ku curled her lips and gloomily said, "Of course the White Dew courtyard's conditions can't compare to the palace. But coming to the Sky Pillar sect to cultivate is to suffer hardships. Otherwise, how can I increase my strength? And, it's good that you can think like that." Ji Tianqing nodded and asked, "Then what have you been studying in the past half a month? Have you also been studying alchemy?" Ji Ku's eyes widened in confusion and asked, "What are we studying alchemy for? It's not like we can increase our strength. Ever since we entered the White Dew courtyard, we've been practicing sword arts from dawn until noon every day. We also have to meditate in the afternoon and evening. Lord Deacon said that we should focus on cultivating martial arts. We can't be distracted by other things." Ji Tianqing stared at Ji Ku in a daze. His brows slightly furrowed as a trace of doubt flashed through his heart. It seems that the contents of the 3 outer courtyards' teachings are different. The disciples of the White Dew courtyard cultivate diligently, but our Tempest Courtyard wants to learn alchemy. I don't know what the deacons are thinking, but there should be some deeper meaning, right? At this moment, Ji Ku looked at him with concern and asked with a smile, Brother Tianqing, how have you been for the past 2 weeks? Did it go well? Successful? Ji Tianqing hesitated for a moment before squeezing out a smile. He nodded and said, yes, not bad. Humph. Big Brother Tianqing, you're lying. I can tell. Ji Ku saw that his expression was strange, so she pouted and looked unhappy. Big Brother Tianqing, are you in trouble? If you still treat me as a friend, then tell me. Ji Tianqing knew that Ji Ku was extremely intelligent. His reaction just now could not be hidden from Ji Ku. Thus, he could only tell Ji Ku the truth. All right. Actually, things have been going well for me for the past 2 weeks. It's just that someone is secretly plotting against me. They've already ambushed me twice. Unfortunately, I've tried every means to investigate, but I haven't been able to find any clues. I don't know who is secretly plotting against me. There's actually such a thing. Ji Ku's eyes widened, her pretty face filled with worry. Despicable bastard. He's actually so daring to ambush Big Brother Tianqing in the Sky Pillar sect. Ji Ku looked indignant, as if she was the one who was ambushed. After frowning and thinking for a moment, she lowered her voice and asked, Big Brother Tianqing, do you have any suspicions about who it is? Could it be my imperial uncle? Or, that despicable Lu Mingyang? She knew that Lu Mingyang had entered the Sky Pillar sect and directly skipped the outer court to become an inner court disciple. Ji Tianqing shook his head and said with a solemn expression, I've investigated and analyzed it. That person is neither your imperial uncle nor Lu Mingyang. Then who else could it be? Ji Ku frowned and pondered with a puzzled expression. After a moment, she suddenly thought of something and a glint flashed across her eyes. Oh right. Big Brother Tianqing, I suddenly thought of someone. I think it's very likely to be him. Ling Yunfei's cousin, Jian Yu. Ji Tianqing frowned and looked confused. Ling Yunfei's cousin? How could it be her cousin? Jian Yu. I've never heard of this person. Ji Ku quickly explained, Big Brother Tianqing, it's like this. Ling Yunfei does have a cousin called Jian Yu. 3 years ago, Jian Yu passed the Sky Pillar sect's entrance examination and left the Royal Azure Kingdom to become a disciple of the Sky Pillar sect. Since then, Jian Yu has never returned to the Royal Azure Kingdom. However, it's said that Jian Yu has always liked his cousin, Ling Yunfei. Ji Tianqing finally understood and nodded, no wonder I've never heard Ling Yunfei mention Jian Yu. It turns out that he entered the Sky Pillar sect 3 years ago. 3 years have passed. As long as his aptitude isn't bad, he should have entered the inner sect by now and gained a foothold in the Sky Pillar sect to familiarize himself with the situation. In that case, the black-clothed man who ambushed me could really be him. Ji Ku also nodded and said, Big Brother Tianqing, you've just entered the sect. There are only a few people who have a grudge with you. After excluding my imperial uncle and Lu Mingyang, only Jian Yu is the most suspicious. Big Brother Tianqing, you must be careful in the future. Listening to her worried tone, Ji Tianqing nodded to show that he understood. After the two chatted for a while, Ji Ku bid farewell and left. After Ji Ku left the Fengyun courtyard, Ji Tianqing restrained his complicated thoughts and carried the alchemy ingredients to the pill room. Ji Ling had just walked out of the Fengyun courtyard with a bag of alchemy ingredients in his hand and was about to go to the pill room to try alchemy. However, just as he walked to the entrance, he saw a burly young man standing outside the door. Ji Ling's eyes flashed with a strange light. He quickly greeted him with a smile and respectfully said, Senior Brother Hao, why have you come to the Fengyun courtyard? The burly young disciple was Hao Meng. He glanced at Ji Ling and revealed a hearty smile. He nodded and said, Ji Ling, I came here specifically to find you. Ji Ling quickly asked, Senior Brother Hao, what are your orders? Hao Meng patted him on the shoulder and said with a smile, "Don't ask first. Come with me to see senior sister. She sent me to find you." Senior sister? Ji Ling was startled. Yun Yao's fairy-like face and figure appeared in his mind. Seeing Hao Meng turn around and leave, he didn't dare to think too much and quickly followed. An hour later, Hao Meng left the towering sky peak with Ji Ling and arrived at the most sacred and solemn Crimson Firmament Peak in the towering sky sect. Hao Meng brought Ji Ling to the top of the mountain and arrived at the gate of the towering sky palace. He saw Yun Yao waiting at the gate. The two of them went forward and bowed to Yun Yao, then Hao Meng bid farewell and left. At the gate of the majestic and solemn palace, only Ji Ling and Yun Yao were left. Ji Ling's mood was a little perturbed, but there was also a faint sense of anticipation. He secretly guessed that he was brought to the Crimson Firmament Peak, where outer disciples were not qualified to approach. It was very likely that there was an important matter. Sure enough, Yun Yao said to him expressionlessly, "Ji Ling, come with me to see the sect master now. Remember, you must tell the truth. If you guys like this book, please give it 5 stars when you review it. Because the system defaults to 3 stars, I hope that you can manually light up all 5 stars. Thank you very much." Chapter 121. Before entering the Sky Pillar sect, Ji Ling had vaguely learned some news. He knew that he was the person the Sky Pillar sect was looking for, and it seemed to be related to a very important matter. So he knew that once he entered the Sky Pillar sect, he would definitely be valued and cultivated. However, he had been in the sect for half a month and had not been valued. He was secretly anxious in his heart, but he could not find anyone to ask. Now he knew that the time had finally come. Hearing Yun Yao's words, his heartbeat suddenly sped up, and his eyes flashed with joy. He did not expect that the Sky Pillar sect master would personally receive him. This importance and honor simply made his blood boil with excitement. However, he remained calm on the surface and respectfully cupped his hands. "I will follow senior sister's teachings." Yun Yao did not answer and calmly led him into the main hall. The main hall was silent, and there was only a figure sitting on the throne at the head. It was a middle-aged man in a golden robe. His face was resolute and handsome, and he had long snow-white hair. His aura was very dignified and powerful. Ji Ling was quick-witted and of course recognized that it was the Sky Pillar sect master. He followed Yun Yao into the main hall and stood still, bowing with Yun Yao. "Disciple greets sect master. Disciple greets sect master." Chu Tianqing sat on the sect master's throne and looked down at Ji Ling. He could see at a glance that Ji Ling had the strength of the 7th level of the True Element realm and was about to advance to the 8th level of the True Element realm. Moreover, he saw that Ji Ling's appearance was dignified, and his temperament and speech were very elegant. He secretly nodded in his heart and had a plan. "You're called Ji Ling. Are you a prince of the imperial family of the Clear Sky Kingdom?" Chu Tianqing stared at Ji Ling and asked calmly. Ji Ling felt a chill all over his body when he was stared at by his wise and calm eyes, as if he had been seen through. He hurriedly lowered his head, cupped his fists and replied, "Yes, sect master." Chu Tianqing nodded slightly and asked again, "Ji Ling, have you seen your great-grandmother or great-grandmother?" This question immediately stunned Ji Ling. Great-grandmother referred to his grandfather's mother. His great-grandmother was his grandfather's grandmother. In the royal family of the Royal Azure Cloud Kingdom, the only living ancestor was Ji Shenshao. Thus, Ji Ling answered truthfully and shook her head, reporting to sect leader, "This disciple has never seen him before." Disappointment flashed in the depths of Chu Tianqing's eyes, but no one noticed it. He nodded calmly and said, "That's fine. Those are ancestors from 100 years ago. It's normal that you haven't seen them before. Ji Ling, come here. Let me take a good look at you." Although Ji Ling didn't understand Chu Tianqing's meaning, she still walked forward and respectfully lowered her head before Chu Tianqing. Chu Tianqing reached out and grabbed Ji Ling's wrist. He secretly released his powerful spiritual sense to check the situation inside Ji Ling's body. Ji Ling didn't know what was going on and could only stand there quietly, looking very well behaved. In reality, hundreds of thoughts were flashing through his mind. He thought to himself, sect leader is using his spiritual sense to check my situation. Could it be that he wants to check my innate talent? Fortunately, I have completely refined the God-seizing bead. My dantian is the same as an ordinary martial artist's. Sect leader definitely won't be able to see any abnormalities. A moment later, Chu Tianqing seemed to have detected something and a glint flashed in his eyes. Sure enough, it's the Xianjian bloodline. He exclaimed in excitement and withdrew his right hand and spiritual sense. He turned to look at Yun Yao and said with a gratified expression, Yun Yao, you've done well. This time, the three of you have done a meritorious service. I will reward the three of you tomorrow. Yun Yao calmly cupped her hands and bowed, thank you, sect leader master. Chu Tianqing looked at Ji Ling and said with a smile, Ji Ling, go back to the storm courtyard and cultivate hard. I will ask Deacon Han to send you 2 heaven heart pills and 2 blood spirit pills later. With the help of these pills, your Xianjian bloodline will be refined and your strength will increase greatly. After you pass the assessment and enter the inner sect, if your character is good and your aptitude is good, I might accept you as my personal disciple. Hearing this, Ji Ling was stunned and revealed an expression of disbelief. He never thought that the surprise would come so suddenly. The honorable sect leader actually said that he would accept him as his personal disciple. Ji Ling was very clear that Yun Yao was the sect leader's personal disciple and was also the #1 genius of the Tianqian region. She was recognized as the successor to the position of sect leader. In a few decades, after sect leader Chu Tianqing abdicated, Yun Yao would inherit the position of sect leader and control the Sky Pillar sect and the entire Tianqian region. If he was also accepted as a disciple by the sect leader, he would have the chance to compete with Yun Yao for the position of sect leader in the future. Taking control of the entire heavenly stellar region was his lifelong wish. He never dared to imagine that he would be so close to the goal he had been pursuing all his life. Thinking of this, he was so excited that his hands trembled. He was so excited that even his voice trembled. He bowed deeply and said with sincerity, thank you, sect master, for your guidance. This disciple will definitely cultivate diligently and will definitely not disappoint sect leader. Although Yun Yao did not speak, a hint of surprise flashed through her eyes. She did not expect that her sect leader would actually say those words himself. She was very clear that becoming the sect leader's personal disciple meant that he would have the qualifications to compete for the position of sect leader in the future. What an amazing opportunity this was. However, she vaguely guessed the reason and did not say anything. Chu Tianqing smiled and nodded. He waved his hand and said, all right, Ji Ling, you can go back. Ji Ling thanked Chu Tianqing again and respectfully bid farewell. He turned around and left the Sky Pillar Palace. After Ji Ling left, Yun Yao frowned slightly and asked Chu Tianqing, Master, you just promised to accept Ji Ling as your personal disciple. Isn't this gift too great? Could it be that he can receive such preferential treatment just because he has the Xianjian bloodline? The corners of Chu Tianqing's mouth curled into a playful smile. He nodded slightly and said, Yun Yao, Master naturally has his reasons for doing this. There are still some things you don't know about the sealing array. In fact, there are a total of 2 sealing arrays that suppress the unparalleled demon. The first sealing array was casually set up by the unworldly expert who defeated the unparalleled demon with a single sword strike 1,000 years ago. After 1,000 years, that array has been broken and its power has weakened. However, other than that otherworldly expert or his successor, no one else can control the sealing formation. Our sect seniors had long expected that the sealing array would weaken after 1,000 years at most, so they would reinforce the array every 200 years. However, this is still not a long-term solution. Our sect's seniors have long been bitterly searching for various ways. At this point, Chu Tianqing revealed a look of reminiscence and recounted in a low voice. More than 100 years ago, our sect had an elder who was proficient in formations. When it came to formations, it was difficult to find a match in the 9 regions of the southern continent. She painstakingly studied for 36 years and finally set up the 9 dragons trapping demon formation to suppress the unparalleled demon beneath the crimson firmament peak. If the 9 dragons trapping demon formation was activated, the first sealing array would be strengthened and the unparalleled demon would not be able to break through the seal. Unfortunately, the elder left the sect and the 9 dragons trapping demon formation was completed. Her whereabouts have been unknown ever since. Chu Tianqing shook his head with a wry smile and said in a low voice, speaking of which, that elder was my senior sister. Chapter 122. After listening to Chu Tianqing's explanation, Yun Yao came to a sudden realization and guessed the reason. She frowned and thought for a moment before asking Chu Tianqing, Master, you asked Ji Ling if he had seen his great-grandmother or great-grandmother? Could it be, you think that Ji Ling's great-grandmother or great-grandmother might be that elder from back then, your senior sister? Chu Tianqing nodded slightly and said in a low voice, that senior sister of mine was also an outstanding beauty among the female disciples of our sect. Her talent in the Tao of formations was unparalleled, and many genius disciples were infatuated with her. Unfortunately, that senior sister had already made a promise to someone else, and it was said that she was from the secular world. When Yun Yao saw her master's expression, she guessed that her master must have been infatuated with that elder back then as well. However, she only thought about it in her heart and would not say it out loud. She continued to ask, Master, that elder set up the 9 dragons trapping demon formation back then. Could it be that you and the other elders have no way to open it? Chu Tianqing shook his head. That elder has the bloodline of Xianjian. If you want to open the 9 dragons trapping demon formation, you must use the bloodline of Xianjian as a primer. Whether Ji Ling is that elder's descendant or not, he also has the bloodline of Xianjian. He might be able to open the 9 dragons trapping demon formation. Yun Yao finally understood everything. She nodded solemnly and said, so that's how it is. Chu Tianqing pondered for a moment and continued, Yun Yao, I know that suddenly accepting another disciple might make you feel uncomfortable. However, this person concerns the life and death of our sect. I can only do this. I have to ensure his safety and nurture him with all my might. Of course, I want to accept him as my personal disciple because he can open the 9 dragons trapping demon formation. If he can open the 9 dragons trapping demon formation, he will have done a great service to our sect. It is only right for me to accept him as my personal disciple. Yun Yao nodded to show that she understood. She quickly said seriously, Don't worry, Master. I understand. I have to look at the big picture and will not feel uncomfortable. That's good. Chu Tianqing nodded with a gratified expression. All right, you can leave now. Bring Bai Wuchen and Hao Meng here tomorrow to receive their rewards. After Yun Yao bowed and thanked Chu Tianqing, she turned around and left the heaven-raising palace. After Ji Ling left the scarlet firmament peak, she walked alone on the tree-lined path at the foot of the mountain. Even now, he still couldn't suppress the excitement in his heart, and his eyes were filled with a bright light. Great! This is my, Ji Ling's, destiny. I really didn't expect that the Xianjian bloodline would bring me such heaven-defying luck. Not only will the sect leader nurture me, he will also take me in as his personal disciple. With the sect leader's support and nurturing, I will be able to reach Tongxian realm within half a year. By then, I will be able to pass the examination and enter the inner sect, becoming the sect leader's disciple. Ji Ling's face was flushed with excitement as she fantasized with anticipation. Although Yun Yao is the #1 genius of the Tianqian region and the recognized successor of the sect master, she is still a woman. After I become the sect leader's personal disciple, I will find a way to defeat Yunyao and take the position of the sect leader. By then, I will be able to achieve my lifelong goal of controlling the entire Tianshan region. Ha ha ha, thinking of this, Ji Ling wanted to laugh out loud to vent the excitement in his heart. However, after being happy for a while, he gradually calmed down. He frowned and pondered for a moment before realizing that there was a huge hidden danger in this matter. The reason why the sect leader values me so much and I can become his personal disciple in the future is because I have the Xianjian bloodline. If that's the case, if I didn't use the God-seizing pearl to take away Ji Tianqing's Xianjian bloodline, this great surprise and opportunity would have been his. Not only does Ji Tianqing know that I took the Xianjian bloodline, but even Ji Kun knows that Ji Tianqing is the one who has the Xianjian bloodline. No. I can't let them leak the news and ruin my great opportunity and luck. For my lifelong dream and ambition, I can't let Ji Tianqing and Ji Ku live. They must die. Thinking of this, Ji Ling secretly clenched his fists as a cold killing intent flashed in his eyes. He had already decided to kill Ji Tianqing and Ji Ku as soon as possible. This way, no one in the Sky Pillar sect would know the secret of him seizing the Xianjian bloodline. As Ji Ling walked towards the Sky Pillar peak, he was still silently calculating in his heart. 15 minutes later, he was walking on a tree-lined path in the back mountain when he suddenly saw a young disciple in a white robe in front of him. That young man was obviously an inner disciple. He was walking on the path unsteadily, and Ji Ling vaguely felt that he had seen him before. He quickly quickened his pace to catch up. When he reached the white-robed young man's side, he recognized that this person was Jian Yu. Jian Yu was about the same age as him, and the two of them had known each other 3 years ago. Ji Ling frowned and thought for a moment. Suddenly, a thought flashed through his mind, and he immediately had an idea. He quickly stopped Jian Yu and pretended to be surprised as he asked, "You are Jian Yu?" Jian Yu immediately stopped and turned his head to look at Ji Ling. After seeing Ji Ling clearly, he was also a little surprised. He slightly frowned and said, "Ji Ling. You also entered the Sky Pillar sect?" Ji Ling quickly nodded and said, "Yes, I just entered the outer sect storm courtyard half a month ago." Jian Yu didn't say anything, but he thought in his heart, "I didn't expect that this trash prince with a damaged dantian could actually enter the Sky Pillar sect. During the new disciple entrance ceremony half a month ago, I was only focused on looking for Ji Tianqing, but I didn't find Ji Ling." At this time, Ji Ling sized up Jian Yu and asked doubtfully, "Jian Yu, your face is pale and your legs are inconvenient. Are you injured? What happened?" Jian Yu expressionlessly replied, "It's nothing serious. You don't have to worry." Ji Ling could see that he was injured and was in a bad mood. He deliberately sighed with a sorrowful face and said, "AI. Originally, Feifei was going to enter the sect with this prince. I didn't expect that right before the entrance competition, she would be cruelly killed by that bastard Ji Tianqing." When Ling Yunfei was mentioned, Jian Yu's face became even paler. His eyes were filled with hatred and killing intent. "Ji Tianqing. That damn bastard, I will never let him off." Ji Ling saw that Jian Yu had fallen into the trap and probed, "Jian Yu, Ji Tianqing was framed by someone using the white sun fruit. It couldn't be that you did it, right?" Jian Yu glanced at him and said in a low voice, "So what if I framed him? If I find a good opportunity, I will kill him with my own hands and avenge Feifei." Ji Ling's face immediately turned solemn and said with a common enemy, "Jian Yu, I also have a blood feud with Ji Tianqing. If you want to kill him, count me in." Jian Yu's tone was filled with unwillingness as he said, "It's a pity that Ji Tianqing is too cunning. I have already failed once. It will be difficult to kill him again." Ji Ling revealed a confident smile and said in a low voice, "Jian Yu, I have a way to kill Ji Tianqing. Why don't we join hands?" Chapter 123. Ji Ling and Jian Yu whispered to each other for a while on the tree-lined path. No one knew what the two of them were talking about. A moment later, the two of them seemed to have reached an agreement. They nodded solemnly and parted ways. Ji Ling did not return to the wind cloud courtyard. Instead, he went straight to the inner sect at the peak of the mountain. He entered a certain house and stood outside a room. He knocked on the door with a calm expression. After a while, the door opened with a creak. Lu Mingyang saw Ji Ling outside the door and revealed a smile. He asked, "Ji Ling, why are you looking for me?" Ji Ling looked around and said in a low voice, "Brother Lu, I came to find you this time to ask for your help. Come, let's talk inside." Lu Mingyang hurriedly led him into the house and closed the door. After Ji Ling entered the house and sat down, he went straight to the point. "Brother Lu, I have already contacted an old friend. This person also has a grudge with Ji Tianqing. We have decided to deal with Ji Tianqing, but this plan needs your help to be flawless. Deal with Ji Tianqing?" Lu Mingyang grinned and revealed a sinister sneer. "Good. Ji Ling, tell me, how do you want me to help you?" Ji Ling revealed a confident smile and whispered his plan into Lu Mingyang's ear. Lu Mingyang listened attentively. After listening, he could not help but nod. "Good. Ji Ling, your plan is very good. Ji Tianqing is dead for sure. He won't be able to escape this calamity." Ji Ling looked at him and revealed a sinister sneer. White Dew Courtyard, the house where the female disciples lived. Ji Ku was meditating and cultivating in her room when a female disciple suddenly called her name outside the door. When she got up and opened the door, the female disciple handed her a letter and said that it was sent by a male disciple of the Wind Cloud Courtyard. Ji Ku thanked the female disciple and returned to her room to open the letter. There was only one sentence on the palm-sized paper. The handwriting was neat and strong. "Cuckoo, I will be waiting for you at the pavilion halfway up Jade Sword Peak. I have something to discuss with you. See you there." It was signed by Ji Tianqing. "Big brother Tianqing is looking for me." Ji Ku put away the envelope and smiled sweetly. She opened the door with a heart full of joy and subconsciously wanted to go to the appointment. However, when she entered the courtyard, she calmed down and frowned in confusion. "If Big Brother Tianqing is looking for me, why did we meet at Jade Sword Peak? We just met today. What does he have to discuss with me?" Thinking of this, Ji Ku decided to go to the storm courtyard to look for Ji Tianqing to verify the authenticity of the letter. A quarter of an hour later, she entered the storm courtyard and arrived outside Ji Tianqing's room. She knocked on the door several times, but Ji Tianqing did not open the door. The room was also silent. At this moment, the door to the next room opened. A tall and handsome young man walked out and asked with a smile, "Junior Marshal Sister, are you looking for Brother Ji?" N. Ji Ku nodded and asked, "Is Big Brother Tianqing not here?" The young man with a bright smile replied, "Brother Ji went out not long ago. I heard him say that he had an appointment." Ji Ku already had an answer in her heart, so she asked, "May I ask who you are?" The bright young man smiled and said, "I am Brother Ji's friend. My name is Nye Hao." "Senior Marshal Brother Nye Hao, thank you." Ji Ku smiled and thanked him, then turned around and left. She no longer had any doubts and went straight to Jade Sword Peak. The peak where the outer sect was located was called Heaven Upholding Peak. Jade Sword Peak was behind Heaven Upholding Peak to the right and was about a dozen li away. Behind Heaven Upholding Peak was the peak where Grand Peace Palace was located. Behind it was the sect's core, Crimson Firmament Peak. Ji Ku's heart was filled with Ji Tianqing's words. She was afraid that she would make Ji Tianqing wait for a long time, so she quickened her pace. Ji Tianqing was walking on Jade Sword Peak's mountain path. His footsteps were very fast, and his face was somewhat gloomy. There was a hint of anger between his brows. "That damn Ji Ling. I thought that he would restrain himself after entering the sect, but I didn't expect that he would still dare to provoke me like this. He invited me to Jade Sword Peak and said that he had secret information to tell me. This must be his scheme. What does he want to do? As he rushed to the pavilion halfway up the mountain, he was still silently calculating in his heart. Although he knew that Ji Ling took the initiative to provoke him, it was very likely that he had some scheme. But his strength had improved a lot, and he had also mastered the flying star sword art. His strength far surpassed that of a normal true element realm martial artist. No matter what kind of scheme Ji Ling had, he was not afraid. Very quickly, Ji Tianqing arrived halfway up the mountain. He walked along the tree-lined path until he reached the end and saw an octagonal pavilion. The pavilion was surrounded by a dense forest. A young disciple wearing a green robe stood in the pavilion with his back facing him. Just by looking at that figure, Ji Tianqing recognized that it was Ji Ling. When he walked into the pavilion, Ji Ling also turned around and looked at him with a sneer. Ji Tianqing, you really came. Ji Tianqing looked at him with a gloomy expression and shouted in a low voice, Ji Ling, cut the crap. What tricks do you want to play by asking me to come here? Ji Ling revealed a mocking sneer and said in a playful tone, don't be agitated. I did ask you to come here because I have important news to tell you. Yes, to be precise, I have a piece of great news to share with you. Ji Tianqing stared at him coldly and shouted, if you have something to say it quickly. Ji Ling was not angry. His smile became even more playful as he said slowly, this morning, Senior Sister brought me to Crimson Firmament Peak's Heaven Raising Hall to meet Sect Master. Sect Master personally checked my aptitude and confirmed that I was the person they were painstakingly looking for. Not only does Sect Master think highly of me, he even rewarded me with a large number of pills and cultivation techniques. He also wants to nurture me with all his might and accept me as his direct disciple. Heh. Ji Tianqing, do you know why? Ji Tianqing frowned as a cold light surged in his eyes. He shouted in a deep voice, Ji Ling, did you invite me here just to show off? Put away that disgusting face of yours. You and I both know very well where your talent came from. Ji Ling immediately laughed complacently. Ha. That's right. So, Ji Tianqing, I have to thank you. It's precisely because of your Xian sword bloodline that I am highly regarded by the sect master. In the future, I can become the sect master's disciple and even inherit the position of sect master. Hearing these words, Ji Tianqing's expression changed drastically. His eyes were filled with rage as he clenched his fists so tightly that they creaked. With a frosty expression, he shouted angrily, Ji Ling. Don't be complacent. Sooner or later, I will take back everything I've lost. However, Ji Ling laughed even more arrogantly. Ha! When is sooner or later? Don't tell me you want to wait until I become the sect master's disciple and have limitless glory before coming to take revenge on me. At that time, I'll be able to kill you with a casual word. Ji Ling. You're courting death. Ji Tianqing could no longer hold back his anger and killing intent as he waved his fist towards Ji Ling. Chapter 124. Ji Tianqing's speed was as fast as the wind, and in the blink of an eye, he was in front of Ji Ling. His fists flickered with golden true essence, and with a sharp and domineering power, he ruthlessly smashed towards Ji Ling's face. Ji Ling was already prepared, and immediately retreated, jumping out of the pavilion. He dodged Ji Tianqing's attack and jumped onto the tree-lined path. With a mocking sneer on his face, he said, Ji Tianqing, you'll never be able to defeat me. In the past, now, and in the future, you will always be under my feet. I will let you know what despair is. Go to hell. Ji Tianqing angrily roared, and once again punched towards Ji Ling. The tree-lined path was somewhat narrow, and Ji Ling found it difficult to dodge his attack, so he used a palm technique to block. Tiger Leap Palm. Ji Ling circulated his true essence, and a powerful force burst out from his body, causing his clothes to flutter in the wind. Both of his palms shot out a violent force. Bang bang bang. In the blink of an eye, the two's fists and palms collided several times, producing a few muffled sounds. Although Ji Ling was at the 7th level of the true essence realm, his true essence was not as powerful as Ji Tianqing's, and he was actually forced back 5 steps. Without waiting for him to stabilize his footing, Ji Tianqing once again punched out. Bang bang. Another few muffled sounds rang out, and Ji Ling blocked 3 punches with his palms, but Ji Tianqing's fist landed on his chest. He was once again forced back 5 steps, his face pale, and the corner of his mouth coughed out blood. Ji Ling. Who is more desperate? Ji Tianqing angrily roared, filled with killing intent, and once again rushed towards Ji Ling. Ji Ling's face was gloomy, and he silently used Tiger Leap Palm, desperately blocking his attacks. The two of them fought in the tree-lined path, their figures constantly twisting and turning, dazzling everyone's eyes. Every time their fists and palms collided, a sharp force would burst out, crushing the flowers and leaves on the side of the path. In a short 100 breaths of time, the two of them had exchanged more than 20 moves. Ji Tianqing, who was at the 6th level of the true essence realm, was actually forcing Ji Ling to retreat step by step. His face was pale, and his forehead was covered in cold sweat. But at this moment, a graceful figure suddenly appeared on the tree-lined path. She was Ji Ku, who had hurriedly rushed over. When she arrived at the pavilion, she saw Ji Tianqing and Ji's figures. Seeing the two of them fighting fiercely, her expression changed and she furrowed her brows. What's going on? Brother Tianqing asked me to come here. Why is royal uncle here too? Why are they fighting? Ji Ku murmured in confusion. She rushed to Ji Tianqing's side and shouted anxiously, Brother Tianqing, royal uncle, please stop. No matter what grudges you have, this is the sect. If you fight in private, you will be punished by the sect. Ji Tianqing and Ji Ling's expressions changed when they heard Ji Ku's voice. A sneer flashed across Ji Ling's eyes as she was secretly pleased with herself. Ji Tianqing, on the other hand, was stunned. He turned to Ji Ku and asked in confusion, Ku, what are you doing here? Ji Ku was also stunned. She asked in confusion, Brother Tianqing, weren't you the one who sent me a letter and asked me to meet here? You also said in the letter that you had something to discuss with me, and that we would meet there. So I hurried over. Ji Tianqing frowned and realized that the situation was not good. No. Ku, I didn't send you a letter. You've been deceived. Ji Ku's eyes widened. After being stunned for a moment, she guessed that it must be Ji Ling's doing. However, just as Ji Tianqing and Ji Ku were confronting each other to verify the authenticity of the letter, Ji Ling had already rushed over to Ji Tianqing's side. Ji Ling had already taken the opportunity to rush in front of Ji Tianqing. She reached out and untied the belt around her waist. With a shake of her hand, she turned it into a soft sword and stabbed it at Ji Tianqing with a sinister smile. Ji Tianqing, prepare to die. Ji Ku had just turned to look at Ji Ling when she saw Ji Ling holding the soft sword in her hand and ruthlessly stabbing it at Ji Tianqing's chest. Brother Tianqing, be careful. At the critical moment, she subconsciously cried out to remind Ji Tianqing. However, by the time Ji Tianqing came back to his senses, it was too late for him to dodge. At the critical moment, Ji Ku stepped forward without hesitation and rushed in front of Ji Tianqing, using her body to block the sword. Chi! The soft sound of the blade piercing through clothes and flesh could be heard. Ji Ku's back was facing Ji Tianqing. A black blade pierced through her right shoulder and came out from her back. Dark red blood flowed out from the wound and dyed the clothes on her back red. Ji Tianqing never thought that Ji Ling would be so despicable and sinister as to use a soft sword to launch a sneak attack. What was even more unexpected was that at the moment of life and death, Ji Ku would not hesitate to sacrifice herself to save him. He was so angry that his eyes were about to pop out of their sockets. His heart also fiercely twitched a few times as he felt a sharp pain. Cuckoo! Ji Tianqing cried out in alarm and immediately rushed towards Ji Ku, wanting to save her. However, Ji Ling's reaction was even faster. She had already pulled out her black soft sword and wrapped her arms around Ji Ku's neck, holding her hostage. Ji Ku's body was hit by the sword. Her face was as pale as paper and she had no strength to resist at all. Ji Ling dragged her and kept retreating. She placed the sword on her neck and shouted at Ji Tianqing with a ferocious expression, "Ji Tianqing. If you come any closer, I'll kill her with one strike." Ji Tianqing was worried about Ji Ku's safety. His heart was burning with anxiety and he did not dare to act rashly. He could only stop and stand 5 meters away from Ji Ling. His incomparable anger almost made him go berserk. His eyes were as red as blood as he roared at the top of his lungs, "Ji Ling. You bastard! Cuckoo is your niece. How could you be so cruel to her? Your heart is so vicious that you're worse than a pig or a dog." Ji Ling grinned and sneered with a sinister expression, "Ji Tianqing, you're really ignorant and laughable. Born in the royal family, there has never been any kinship to speak of. If Ji Ku dies today, it will be because of you. She will die because of you." He shouted with a venomous tone and struck the back of Ji Ku's head with his palm, knocking her unconscious. Then, he dragged the unconscious Ji Ku and retreated. After 10 steps, he had retreated to the end of the tree-lined path. Behind him was a cliff. The jade sword peak was steep and straight. From afar, it looked like a giant sword standing on the ground. The cliff was more than 1,000 meters deep, and at the bottom of the cliff was the dense forest at the foot of the mountain. Ji Tianqing approached Ji Ling step by step and shouted with a stern voice, "Ji Ling. What are you doing? Let go of Ji Ku. I promise I won't kill you today." Ji Ling immediately sneered disdainfully, "You won't kill me. Hee hee. But I want to kill you. Otherwise, why do you think I deliberately tricked the two of you into coming here?" "What?" Ji Tianqing immediately glared angrily, his entire body bursting with killing intent. "Cuckoo is innocent. You won't even let her go." Ji Ling sneered with a sinister expression, "She died for you. You were the one who killed her." With that, he ruthlessly slapped Ji Ku's back and pushed him down the cliff. Chapter 125. Ji Tianqing witnessed Ji Ku being pushed off the cliff and falling down 1,000 meters. His eyes turned red with anger. He glared at Ji Ling, his chest almost bursting with anger and killing intent. At that moment, the unparalleled anger and killing intent made him lose all reason, turning him into an enraged beast. "Ji Ling! You bastard! I'm going to kill you!" Ji Tianqing roared and unleashed all of his strength, punching towards Ji Ling, bang, 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 bang. He instantly struck out 4 golden fist shadows, each of which had the power to shatter stone. Ji Ling's expression was grave as he counterattacked with his sword, slashing out black sword shadows that filled the sky, aiming at Ji Tianqing's vital points. The fist shadows and black sword shadows collided, producing a series of muffled sounds. Ji Tianqing was not a profound comprehension expert after all, so he could not use his true essence to condense fist or sword light. A fist made of flesh and blood, even if it contained the power of true origin, would find it difficult to block weapons. He was forced to continuously retreat, and after exchanging a few blows with Ji Ling, he was forced to retreat to the pavilion. Hatred and killing intent made him no longer have any scruples. He immediately activated his sword chi and used the ultimate move of the Flying Star sword art. 1,000 Feather Blade. Ji Tianqing activated 6 golden sword chi and stabbed at Ji Ling as fast as lightning. In a breath, the 6 sword chi had stabbed over 100 times. The area 3 meters around Ji Ling was covered with golden light, which was extremely dazzling. However, he was suffering unspeakably. He desperately waved his sword to block the sword chi, but he could only block half of the attacks. In the blink of an eye, he was stabbed more than 40 times by the sword chi. His green robe became tattered and became a pile of rags. Although he had the protection of the golden silk armor, which blocked most of the sword chi, his legs were still injured. However, his legs and arms were still pierced a few times by the sword chi, leaving a few bloody holes where blood kept flowing out. The 6 sword chi were still stabbing at an extremely fast speed, and Ji Ling was about to be pierced into a hornet's nest. At the critical moment, a tall and burly young man in a white robe rushed out from the woods beside the path. He brandished his sword and attacked Ji Tianqing. The white-robed youth was Jian Yu. His face was still pale, and his legs were not as nimble as before. However, he glared at Ji Tianqing with a murderous look in his eyes and a ferocious expression on his face. Ji Tianqing. Today is the day you die. Jian Yu let out a furious roar and rushed towards Ji Tianqing like a gust of wind. Then, he brandished his sword and sent out 9 dark yellow sword lights. Damned beast, you actually have helpers. Ji Tianqing's expression immediately changed. He hurriedly controlled the 6 sword chis to fly back to his side to block Jian Yu's attack. The golden sword chi collided with the 9 sword lights, producing a series of clanging sounds. Ji Tianqing saw Jian Yu's figure clearly and recognized the swordsmanship he used. His expression changed immediately. It's you. Are you the man in black who tried to assassinate me? You are Jian Yu. Jian Yu's identity was exposed, but he did not panic in the slightest. His eyes were filled with hatred as he sneered, "Hee hee. You only know now. Don't you think it's too late? You will not be able to escape today. You will die without a doubt." As soon as he finished speaking, Jian Yu once again brandished his sword and attacked Ji Tianqing. Ji Ling also rushed over and slashed out a few sword lights with her sword. She joined forces with Jian Yu to attack. Ji Tianqing was attacked from the left and right by the 2 of them, but he did not panic in the slightest. He controlled the 6 sword chis to assassinate Jian Yu and Ji Ling respectively. In 3 breaths of time, he stabbed out 300 times. The sword lights that Jian Yu and Ji Ling released were instantly shattered by the golden sword chi. The 2 of them were also forced to retreat. A few more bloody holes appeared on their bodies. Their expressions were extremely ugly. Damn it! How can Ji Tianqing be so strong? What kind of sword technique is this? It can actually suppress the 2 of us. As Jian Yu and Ji Ling continued to retreat, their hearts became heavier and heavier. They originally thought that they would be able to kill Ji Tianqing by joining forces. However, they did not expect that Ji Tianqing's combat strength would be so strong. The sword technique he used was unfathomable. The 2 of them were actually beaten back by Ji Tianqing. It was simply unbelievable. Finally, the 1,000-feather blade was completed. A ruthless cold light flashed in Ji Tianqing's eyes as he used the Gale Lightning Strike again. Gale Lightning Strike. He let out a low shout and controlled the 6 sword chis. They merged into 2 huge sword chis that were half a meter long and ruthlessly attacked Jian Yu. The 2 sword chis lit up with a dazzling cold light and swept up a violent hurricane. It caused the trees on both sides of the path to sway and the flowers and plants to be crushed. The golden sword chis mixed with the violent hurricane. It was like a half a meter long lightning bolt that ruthlessly struck Jian Yu. Bang! Jian Yu's face was aghast as he waved his sword to block, but it was useless. With a muffled sound, the sword in his hand was sent flying. He was also sent flying 3 meters away and fell into the forest by the side of the road. He struggled a few times in the forest but was unable to get up. He only felt a tingling pain all over his body and dark red blood kept flowing out of his mouth. After Ji Tianqing heavily injured Jian Yu with one move, he no longer paid attention to him and rushed towards Ji Ling like a gust of wind. Ji Ling! You bastard! I will kill you to pay for Ku's life. Ji Tianqing roared as if he had gone mad. He once again activated the sword cheese and attacked Ji Ling. Ji Ling saw with his own eyes that Jian Yu was sent flying by a single move. He spat out blood as he lay in the forest and did not crawl out for a long time. He was already pale with fright. When he saw Ji Tianqing controlling the sword cheese to attack him again, how could he still have the courage to resist? At this moment, he could only desperately retreat. He was extremely anxious as he shouted in his heart, I miscalculated. I didn't expect that bastard Ji Tianqing to be so strong. Brother Lu, you must come as soon as possible. If you don't come, you can only collect this king's corpse. At this moment, 2 streaks of sword cheese came from the left and right. They shone with a dazzling cold light and swept up a violent hurricane as they ruthlessly slashed down. Bang! The sword light and the hurricane mixed together and slashed Ji Ling. It was like a combination of wind and lightning, knocking him to the ground on the spot. He rolled back more than 10 times before stopping. He lay on the edge of the cliff and spat out a large mouthful of blood. He was in an extremely sorry state. Even though he had the protection of the golden silk armor, he was still seriously injured by the wind and lightning and could not get up for a while. Seeing Ji Tianqing walking over with a murderous aura, Ji Ling was immediately filled with despair. However, he suddenly saw Lu Mingyang rushing over with a black-robed man on the path behind Ji Tianqing. He secretly heaved a sigh of relief and pretended to be angry as he shouted, Ji Tianqing. You actually want to publicly kill a fellow disciple for your own personal grudge. You are simply guilty of a heinous crime. Ji Tianqing immediately stopped in his tracks, his brows tightly knitted together. He subconsciously turned his head and looked behind him. He saw Lu Mingyang and a middle-aged man in a black robe. Although he didn't know the black-robed man, he knew very well that he was a deacon of the Sky Pillar sect. Sure enough, Lu Mingyang hurriedly rushed to the scene. When he saw Ji Ling covered in blood, he said with righteous indignation, Deacon, look. Ji Tianqing is so cruel. He actually dared to do such a vicious thing to a fellow disciple in the sect. Chapter 126. Ji Tianqing had a bad premonition when he saw Lu Mingyang appear with the black deacon. He immediately understood that this was all part of Ji Ling's scheme. He and Ji Ku were both tricked by Ji Ling, and Jian Yu and Lu Mingyang were her accomplices. At this moment, the black deacon walked to the middle of the field and shouted angrily, Stop! The disciplinary deacon is here. Don't you dare be so arrogant. If the disciplinary deacon had come a moment later, Ji Tianqing would have killed Ji Ling. However, since the disciplinary deacon was here, he no longer had the chance to kill Ji Ling and could only reluctantly stop. Ji Ling sneered in her heart but pretended to be on the verge of death. She reported to the disciplinary deacon, Deacon, you came at the right time. Ji Tianqing, that bastard, wanted to kill me. Deacon, you must seek justice for me. The disciplinary deacon looked at Ji Ling and asked in a low voice, What's going on? Why are you here and why are you killing each other? Without waiting for Ji Tianqing to explain, Ji Ling spoke first, Deacon, this is what happened. Ji Tianqing and I both came from Qingyun Kingdom and we had a grudge in the secular world. After we entered the sect, we both entered the storm courtyard. He always wanted to take revenge on me but never had the chance. Coincidentally, I have a niece called Ji Ku who was cultivating in the White Dew courtyard. Ji Tianqing tricked her to come here and used her as a hostage to force me to submit to him. After I heard the news, I brought Senior Jian Yu to save Ji Ku. I didn't expect that. Ji Tianqing, that evil bastard, would injure Ji Ku and push her down the cliff. After the matter was exposed, he even wanted to kill me and Jian Yu. Fortunately, Deacon, you came in time. Otherwise, we would be dead. Ji Tianqing was so angry that he was about to go crazy. His body emitted a thick murderous intent as he stared at Ji Ling. Ji Ling. You despicable bastard. You're worse than a pig or a dog. You clearly tricked me and Ji Ku into coming here. You were the one who personally pushed Ji Ku off the cliff. How dare you slander me and slander me? How can there be such a vicious and shameless bastard in this world? Ji Ling sneered and explained, Ji Tianqing, you're really funny. Ji Ku is my niece. I've always doted on her. How could I push her off the cliff? Even if you want to quibble and slander me, please use your brain. Hearing Ji Tianqing's words, the disciplinary deacon frowned and gloomily looked at Ji Tianqing. Just then, Jian Yu crawled out of the woods. He was covered in blood and mud, looking as miserable as Ji Ling. When he saw the disciplinary deacon, it was as if he had seen his savior. He quickly endured his injuries and bowed, Disciple Jian Yu greets deacon. I can testify for Ji Ling. After Ji Ling received the news, he invited me to come to Jade Sword Peak to save his niece. Unfortunately, when we arrived, we saw Ji Tianqing pushing Ji Ku off the cliff. We were so angry that we wanted to capture Ji Tianqing and hand him over to the sect for punishment. I didn't expect Ji Tianqing to be so strong. He actually wanted to kill us to silence us and cover up the evidence. Deacon, you saw it with your own eyes when you came just now. Everything this disciple said is true. At this moment, Lu Mingyang hurriedly added, Deacon, I can also testify for Ji Ling. Ji Tianqing has a personal grudge with him and has always been looking for an opportunity to take revenge on him. Moreover, Ji Tianqing stole a spirit fruit from the spiritual herbal garden on the second day after entering the Fengyun courtyard. He was punished by Deacon Han of the Fengyun courtyard. A despicable and sinister person like Ji Tianqing is simply a disgrace to our sect. Now that he has committed such a heinous crime, I hope Deacon will punish him severely. Ji Ling, Jian Yu, and Lu Mingyang were in cahoots. They all insisted that Ji Tianqing killed Ji Ku and wanted to silence him. Ji Tianqing was so angry that he wanted to go berserk, but he couldn't defend himself. He had no evidence and no one to testify for him. Of course, the disciplinary deacon wouldn't believe him. After a while, the disciplinary deacon asked about the situation and ordered in a deep voice, Ji Tianqing, Ji Ling, and Jian Yu, this matter is very serious. I will definitely investigate it thoroughly. Before the investigation is completed, the three of you have to follow me back to the disciplinary hall to await your punishment. In addition, I will immediately send orders to send people to search for Ji Ku at the bottom of the cliff. After that, the disciplinary deacon led everyone away from Jade Sword Peak and returned to the disciplinary hall at the peak of Towering Sky Peak. Ji Tianqing, Ji Ling, and Jian Yu were locked up in 3 quiet rooms in the discipline hall, awaiting the discipline hall's investigation and judgment. Not only that, but the disciplinary hall also sent people to search for Ji Ku's whereabouts at the foot of Jade Sword Peak. Half a day quickly passed. In the disciplinary hall's 3rd quiet room, Ji Tianqing was sitting in a corner, expressionlessly looking up at the small window on the wall. This quiet room was only 3 meters in radius. There was nothing in the room, not even a chair. The floor and walls were all made of dark brown boulders, and there was an iron window the size of a human head on the wall. Through the iron window, one could only see a palm-sized piece of sky outside. Night had already fallen, and the sky outside the window was gloomy. Ji Tianqing had been sitting in the cold corner for an entire afternoon. His mood had long since changed from anger and irritation to indifference and helplessness. He knew the truth of the matter and had repeatedly told the disciplinary deacon. However, the Sky Pillar sect's rules were strict, and the disciplinary deacon wouldn't believe his one-sided story. Before the matter was thoroughly investigated, the only thing he could do was obediently stay in the quiet room and wait for the disciplinary hall's judgment. He had long since made up his mind that after this matter was over, he would find an opportunity to kill Ji Ling and take revenge. At this moment, he was most worried about Ji Ku, but there was nothing he could do. He could only silently pray for Ji Ku. Ku, nothing must happen to you. You must not die. I will definitely clear your name and avenge you by killing Ji Ling. I swear. The quiet room was deathly silent, and time seemed to pass very slowly. After an unknown period of time, someone opened the door to the quiet room. A black-robed deacon walked into the room and looked at Ji Tianqing with an indifferent expression. He said in a deep voice, "Ji Tianqing, come out." Ji Tianqing immediately stood up and anxiously asked, "Sir Deacon, have you found Ji Ku? How is she?" The deacon glanced at him and coldly said, "Ji Ku isn't dead, but she's on the verge of death and unconscious." Ji Tianqing finally let out a sigh of relief and muttered, "It's good that she's not dead. I knew Ku was lucky and wouldn't die like this. Come with me." The deacon ordered in a deep voice. "Where to?" Ji Tianqing subconsciously asked, "Has the disciplinary hall finished their investigation and wants to let me out?" The deacon looked at him expressionlessly and said in a deep voice, "The matter hasn't been completely investigated, but it's basically confirmed that you murdered your fellow disciples. However, we still need to wait for Ji Ku to wake up before we can make a final conclusion. Before Ji Ku wakes up, the disciplinary hall has decided to imprison you in the dark wind cave in the back mountain. You should properly reflect on your actions." "What? That's impossible." Ji Tianqing immediately said anxiously, "It was clearly Ji Ling who plotted against me and Ji Ku. Ji Ku and I are good friends. How could I harm her?" "Cut the crap." The deacon coldly said, "You don't have any evidence to prove your innocence, so you must abide by the disciplinary hall's investigation. Come with me to the dark wind cave now." Chapter 127. The night was dark and the wind was howling. Ji Tianqing was escorted by the black deacon to the back of the mountain and into a dark cave. The cave was slanted and extended underground. It was deep and winding. Every 30 meters, there was a stone lamp on both sides of the cave wall that was lit. The stone lamp was an ancient origin artifact. It was lit by a formation, but the light was weak. The dim yellow light could not illuminate the cave, so Ji Tianqing could not see what was going on inside the cave. 15 minutes later, the black deacon escorted him into the deepest part of the cave. In front of him was a dark cliff. Layers of brown rocks could be seen at the bottom of the cliff. To the left of the cliff was a dark and cold stone room. Ji Tianqing was imprisoned in this stone room. Before leaving, the black deacon closed the heavy black iron door and locked it with a large chain. "Ji Tianqing. Stay in the dark wind cave and reflect on your mistakes. Don't even think about escaping. If you dare to escape, you will be executed on the spot when we catch you." After saying this, the black deacon turned and left. His figure quickly disappeared into the darkness. Ji Tianqing stood in the cold stone room. His hands gripped the iron bars of the black iron door. He shouted unwillingly, "Deacon, I have been framed. As long as you save Ji Ku, the truth will be revealed." However, the black deacon walked further and further away, completely ignoring him. After a long time, the dark wind cave fell into a dead silence. Ji Tianqing let go of his hands and sat on the stone bench in a daze. There were only two things in the dark and cold stone room. There was an ancient stone lamp on the wall and a rough stone bench in the corner. Other than that, there was nothing else. The ground was covered in dust. Footprints were left behind when one stepped on it. No one knew how long it had been since someone was locked in this stone room. Ji Tianqing did not know how long he would be locked in here. Maybe 2 or 3 days. Or 2 or 3 months. The key to determining how long he would be locked up was when Ji Ku would wake up. However, Ji Ku was first stabbed by Ji Ling, then knocked unconscious and pushed off the cliff. It was already a blessing from the heavens that she didn't die after falling off the cliff. Ji Tianqing found it hard to imagine how serious her injuries were and when she would wake up. Wait. He could only wait bitterly. This stone chamber was located deep underground. Other than the faint light from the stone lantern, he could never see the sky outside. During his imprisonment, only darkness accompanied him. At the bottom of the cliff not far from the stone chamber, endless cold wind was blowing, constantly pouring into the stone chamber. Ji Tianqing had only been sitting on the stone bench for an hour when he was chilled by the bone-chilling cold wind and shivered all over. Darkness, coldness, loneliness, and helplessness surrounded him. Boundless rage and killing intent silently rose in his heart once more. Damn Ji Ling! You bastard! Bastard! When I see the light of day again, I will tear you to pieces and burn your bones to ashes. Ji Tianqing clenched his fists, his fingers cracking as he roared at the top of his lungs. It was the first time in his life that he hated someone so much. It was also the first time he saw someone so despicable and sinister, so deranged to such an extent. Even when he was betrayed and humiliated by Ling Yunfei, the anger and killing intent in his heart were not as turbulent as now. Time passed quietly. After an unknown period of time, Ji Tianqing curled up on the stone bench in the corner. His face was blue from the cold wind, and his entire body was stinging with pain. He knew that he could not sit there any longer. This cave was called Dark Wind Cave, and it was specially used to imprison disciples who violated the sect's rules. Naturally, it was used as a punishment. The endless cold wind was his punishment. No. I have to think of a way to resist the cold wind. If I continue to sit here like this, my flesh and blood will definitely freeze and my meridians will die. The only way Ji Tianqing could think of was to circulate his energy to resist the cold. Fortunately, he had an abundance of vital essence. After the vital essence circulated throughout his body and spread to his limbs and bones, the stinging pain in his flesh and meridians lessened by a lot. This method was indeed effective. Ji Tianqing's emotions calmed down slightly. He abandoned the distracting thoughts in his heart and sat cross-legged on the ground to circulate his energy to cultivate. He followed the third level of the path of the sword and mobilized the vital essence in his body to flow through the 9 main meridians. He wanted to refine the 9 meridians into sword veins. 12 hours had passed, and his power was slowly increasing. His physical body had also adapted to the cold wind that constantly poured into the stone room. An entire day had passed, and the hunger in his stomach made him restless. He had to stop his cultivation and open the 100 treasures brocade pouch to look for food. Fortunately, when the stinky old man detained Xian Yu and the black dragon sword, he did not take away the 100 treasures brocade pouch and returned it to him. He used to store a lot of food and fruits in the 100 treasures brocade pouch for the little ice fox, Xian Yu. After casually eating some fruits and food, his hunger was alleviated, and he started to circulate his energy to cultivate again. Unknowingly, 5 days had passed. In these 5 days, the cave was silent and gloomy. No one had come. Other than Ji Tianqing himself, he did not even see a shadow. He had been circulating his energy to cultivate day and night. When he was hungry, he would look for food in the 100 treasures brocade pouch. Unfortunately, after 5 days of consumption, the little food in the 100 treasures brocade pouch was finally finished. Under the unbearable hunger, Ji Tianqing could only think of another way. He remembered that there were many elixirs in the 100 treasures brocade pouch, so he took out some elixirs and consumed them. He circulated his energy to refine the elixirs and replenish his energy. Experts of the Tongxian realm can abstain from eating. Even if they don't eat a grain of rice for 10 days to half a month, it won't affect them much. Although I'm only at the 6th level of the true energy realm, I can rely on these elixirs to maintain my vital essence and practice abstaining from eating. Abstaining from eating meant that experts of the martial way did not eat and only relied on absorbing the yuan qi of heaven and earth to maintain their energy. This was something only experts of the Tongxian realm could do. The Tongxian realm was the realm where one could understand the heavens and earth and communicate with the underworld. Martial artists of this realm could transform their strong willpower into spiritual consciousness and communicate with the Yuan Qi of heaven and earth. They could absorb the Yuan Qi like water and convert it into their own vital essence. As long as their vital essence was abundant, a Tongxian realm martial artist would not need to eat or drink and still possess great strength. Ji Tianqing had never thought of deliberately practicing abstaining from eating. He wanted to wait until he reached the Tongxian realm and let nature take its course. However, he was in a difficult situation now and had to rely on his strong willpower and endurance to practice abstaining from eating. Unknowingly, another 5 days had passed. In these 5 days, Ji Tianqing only relied on a few elixirs to maintain his vital essence and his strong willpower to endure the hunger. He had actually achieved the initial stage of abstaining from eating. Moreover, he had cultivated in the stone room for 10 days and had successfully refined his first main meridian into a sword meridian. His strength had also increased. Although he had made some progress in the cultivation of the sword heart, he was not happy at all. Instead, he was filled with worry. It's been 10 days. Why hasn't anyone come to find me? Could it be that Ku has been unconscious and hasn't woken up yet? Chapter 128. Ji Tianqing's heart was filled with worry, and his heart was burning with anxiety. He was fine being locked up for 10 days, but he was more worried that Ji Ku still hadn't woken up after 10 days. Could something have happened to him? At the thought of this, he became restless and paced back and forth in the stone room. At this moment, he didn't dare to extravagantly hope that the commandment hall would let him leave Dark Wind Cave once the truth was out. He only hoped that someone would come and tell him some news about Ji Ku. At the very least, it would give him peace of mind. However, no one came to Dark Wind Cave for 10 whole days. Who would come to see him and give him news? Ji Tianqing sat on the stone bench, his thoughts in a mess. After about 4 hours, the sound of light footsteps suddenly came from the dark cave. Ji Tianqing thought that he had misheard or was hallucinating. He was still sitting on the stone bench, deep in thought with a frown. After 100 breaths, the footsteps got closer and clearer. It was only now that Ji Tianqing was finally sure that he hadn't misheard. Someone had really come. He stood up with a swish and held the iron bars of the black iron door with both hands, trying his best to look into the cave. He saw a slim figure in a long white dress with waist-length hair slowly walking out of the darkness. When she came to the door of the stone room, Ji Tianqing was shocked when he saw her face clearly. "Why are you here? Eldest senior sister, why are you here?" Ji Tianqing thought that the person who came was the commandment hall's deacon, but he didn't expect that the person who came was Yun Yao. Yun Yao stood outside the stone room, only separated from him by a black iron door. She looked at him calmly. Seeing that his face was a little haggard and his body was a little haggard, Yun Yao couldn't help but frown slightly, as if she couldn't bear to see him like this. After a moment of silence, she said calmly, "I know that after that incident, you must be angry and irritable being locked up here. That's why I waited until today to see you. I believe that you've calmed down." Ji Tianqing nodded as a bitter smile appeared on his face. "Yes, I was indeed very angry and irritable a few days ago. But since it has already happened, there's nothing I can do no matter how angry I am. There's nothing I can do if I don't calm down." After a pause, he stared into Yun Yao's eyes and asked in a serious tone, "Eldest senior sister, if I said that Ji Ku was pushed off the cliff by Ji Ling and that I was wrongly accused, would you believe me?" Yun Yao nodded without hesitation and said gently, "I believe you. If I didn't believe you, I wouldn't have come to see you." Ji Tianqing's tense heart suddenly relaxed, and his mood also relaxed a lot. He laughed self-deprecatingly and said to himself, "Yes, I didn't think of that." Yun Yao then said gently, "Don't think about running away. Just wait here for the time being. The truth will come to light eventually." Although the commandment hall is strict and merciless, causing the disciples and the sect to be afraid, the commandment hall has always been fair and impartial. They won't wrongly accuse a good person. Ji Tianqing nodded and asked worriedly, eldest senior sister, how's Kuku? Yun Yao frowned slightly and said in a serious tone, Ji Ku's injuries are too serious. It's already a blessing that he's still alive. She's been unconscious. The elders in the sect are trying to find a way to save her, but they don't know when she'll wake up. Ji Tianqing was even more worried. He gripped the bars of the iron door tightly and shouted with grief and indignation, damn Ji Ling. This vicious bastard. I'll kill him sooner or later. Yun Yao shook her head with a complicated expression. Junior brother Tianqing, let me give you a piece of advice. Don't fight with Ji Ling. You can't beat him. Why? Ji Tianqing asked unwillingly, could it be that I can only watch him get away with it and not take revenge? Yun Yao sighed heavily, junior brother Tianqing, Ji Ling is the person our sect is looking for. The sect leader thinks highly of him. Hearing this, Ji Tianqing suddenly remembered what Ji Ling had said to him with a smug expression on his face that day on Jade Sword Peak. Eldest senior sister, that day on Jade Sword Peak, Ji Ling personally told me that he was the person our sect had been painstakingly looking for. The sect leader wanted to nurture him with all his might and even wanted to take him in as a direct disciple. Could it be because he has the Xian sword bloodline? Yun Yao was silent for a while before nodding to Ji Tianqing, yes. He, Ji Tianqing's body trembled. Suddenly, he sneered with a strange expression. His eyes surged with an incomparably vicious glint. Ha ha ha. As expected, the heavens are playing tricks on me. In the end, the sneer had turned into a wild laughter. That wild laughter was filled with anger and unwillingness, as well as a strong sense of ridicule. When Yun Yao saw Ji Tianqing's crazy appearance, she slightly frowned, and felt an inexplicable pain in her heart. This was because she could clearly feel that Ji Tianqing's wild laughter contained a strong sense of sorrow. After a long while, the wild laughter stopped. Ji Tianqing stared at Yun Yao with a burning gaze, and asked in a low voice, eldest senior sister, if I tell you that the Xian sword bloodline was originally my innate bloodline, and that Ji Ling set up a sinister scheme and used the God-seizing orb to steal my life's cultivation and Xian sword bloodline, would you? Would you believe me? He knew how shocking these words were, and how absurd they sounded to others. He was even more clear that if other disciples were to hear these words, they would probably treat him as a lunatic who had lost his mind. However, he didn't know why, but when faced with Yun Yao's beautiful face and those clear eyes that seemed to be able to see through one's heart, he couldn't help but want to tell the truth. Moreover, he was also looking forward to seeing Yun Yao's reaction. Yun Yao was stunned for a moment. Her clear and deep eyes suddenly widened, and only returned to normal after a while. A hint of shock and disbelief appeared on her beautiful face. However, she remained silent and stared at Ji Tianqing's eyes for a long time before nodding solemnly. I believe you. Ji Tianqing's body trembled slightly, and an extremely complicated feeling flashed through his heart, but he also felt an inexplicable sense of relief. He revealed a face full of smiles, a very clean and sincere smile. When he was being wronged, when he was in prison, there was actually someone who believed in him. Moreover, this person was the #1 genius of the Tianshan region, Yun Yao, who was like a fairy from the 9 heavens. How could he not be filled with relief? Yun Yao pondered for a moment, then said to him with a serious expression, Junior brother Tianqing, although this news is very shocking, what the sect leader needs is only the Xian sword bloodline. The sect leader doesn't care about Ji Ling's background at all, nor does he care about how he obtained the Xian sword bloodline. Do you understand? The smile on Ji Tianqing's face suddenly disappeared. After a moment of silence, he said with a bitter smile, I understand. Even if I tell the sect leader this news, it won't affect Ji Ling's future, right? Yun Yao didn't reply, but she tacitly agreed. All right, I should go. She nodded at Ji Tianqing and reminded him again, "Don't give up, wait for the results in peace." With that, she turned around and left. Ji Tianqing watched as her slim back was gradually swallowed by the darkness. After hesitating for a moment, he asked loudly, "Senior sister, I want to ask you one last question. What I said just now, if it was anyone else, they might not believe it. Why are you willing to believe me?" Yin Yao stopped in her tracks, but she didn't turn around. After a moment of silence, she said in a calm voice, "Because I went to the Qingyun kingdom, and after seeing you a few times, I could feel that you are different from the rest. In fact, I always felt that you were the person the sect was looking for." Chapter 129. Before Yin Yao left, she gave Ji Tianqing 2 Heaven Heart elixirs. The Heaven Heart elixir was a black-grade high-grade elixir, a rare cultivation elixir. With these 2 elixirs, not only could Ji Tianqing continue his anedia for half a month, but his cultivation would also increase greatly. He held the 2 elixirs in his hands and stood at the entrance of the stone room for a long time. Although the cave was still dark and the cold wind was still bone-chilling, he did not feel lonely. Yin Yao came to visit him and was willing to believe in him. To him, this was a great comfort and encouragement. His heart had truly calmed down. Even if he had to endure the loneliness and cold, he was no longer so lonely and helpless. After a long time, he returned to the corner and sat down. He took a blood spirit elixir and continued to cultivate. 2 days passed quickly. Ji Tianqing had refined the blood spirit elixir and his cultivation had more than doubled. He was not far from the 7th level of the true energy realm. Moreover, he had achieved a small success in his anedia cultivation. Although he had not eaten or drunk for 7 days, he did not feel hungry. Moreover, his true energy was flowing more easily and smoothly, reaching a point where he could do as he pleased. Late at night, Ji Tianqing was meditating and cultivating in the corner of the cave. Suddenly, he vaguely heard a rustling sound coming from the bottom of the cliff not far away. He thought it was the sound of the wind from the bottom of the cliff and did not pay much attention to it. However, after a while, the sound of rocks rolling down the cliff came from the bottom of the cliff. Ji Tianqing heard it clearly and was immediately awakened. "I'm the only one in this cave. The cliff is so deep that I can't see the bottom. How could there be movement? Could there be some monster or ferocious beast climbing up from the bottom of the cliff?" In the darkness, he did not understand his surroundings and could not help but think of many things. He tiptoed to the side of the iron door and pressed his face against the iron railing, trying his best to look in the direction of the cliff. The cliff 10 meters away was still pitch black, and cold winds were constantly gushing out of it. Ji Tianqing stood motionless by the door and stared at the cliff with wide eyes, silently observing. Ordinary people might not be able to see through the darkness, but he was an expert of the 6th level of the true energy realm. His eyesight was 10 times better than ordinary people. He focused his attention on the cliff and could see the lines of the rock layer on the edge of the cliff. About 10 breaths later, a hand suddenly stretched out from the bottom of the silent cliff. It was a palm that was wider than a normal person's, and its skin was light purple. Although the hand looked slender and looked like a woman's hand, it was indeed a little too big. It was even bigger than Ji Tianqing's palm. "What is it?" Ji Tianqing was shocked. His whole body tensed up, but he held his breath and didn't make a sound. The next moment, a slender figure in a black robe flew out from the bottom of the cliff and landed silently at the edge of the cliff. Even though the robe worn by that person was rather loose and covered 90% of his body, the robe was still quite large. However, the figure under the black robe was tall and slender. Moreover, it was curvaceous. It was obviously a woman. However, the woman's height was astonishing. She was half a head taller than Ji Tianqing, at least 1.9 meters. The skin on her hands and neck was also light purple. It looked a little weird. Ji Tianqing frowned and muttered to himself, "Why is this woman so tall?" And her skin is light purple. Could it be that he's sick? No. Who is she? Why did she climb out from the bottom of the cliff? Just as he was filled with doubts and secretly observing the woman in the black robe, the woman in the black robe sensed his breath and suddenly turned to look at the door of the stone room. Ji Tianqing didn't have time to retreat before he was discovered by the woman in the black robe. Swoosh! A black shadow flashed. The woman in the black robe was like a wisp of black smoke. In an instant, she crossed the distance of 10 meters and appeared at the door of the stone room. She stood outside the iron door, half a meter away from Ji Tianqing. There was only one iron door between them. At such a close distance, Ji Tianqing immediately saw that the woman in the black robe was wearing a cold iron mask. Under the mask, there was a pair of big eyes. The pupils were dark red like blood and emitted a cold air of death. Tall body, weird skin color, and blood-red eyes. Is she a member of the alien tribe? Suddenly, this thought flashed through Ji Tianqing's mind. He was full of shock. At the same time, the woman in the black robe silently stretched out her right hand and quickly grabbed Ji Tianqing's forehead. In the center of her wide palm, there was a dark red blood light, which condensed into a blood hand the size of a washbasin. Ji Tianqing was shocked. Without hesitation, he took 5 steps back and barely dodged the bloody hand's grasp. Bang! The huge dark red bloody hand slammed into the iron bars of the black iron door with a dull thud. The black iron bars were as thick as a child's arm. The material of the bars was comparable to a top-grade Xian weapon and was very tough. However, Ji Tianqing saw with his own eyes that the 3 black iron railings were actually bent and twisted by the dark red bloody hand, as if they were ass. His eyes widened and his eyebrows twitched. He was shocked. Oh my God! This woman's strength is so terrifying. She has probably surpassed the mystic comprehending realm and reached the primal core realm. When the woman in the black robe attacked, he clearly felt the aura of the woman in the black robe. Her aura was not inferior to Yin Yao's. Luckily, he retreated in time. If he was a second later, his head would have been crushed by the woman in the black robe's bloody hand. Who are you? Why do you want to kill me? Ji Tianqing retreated to the corner of the stone room, 8 meters away from the woman in the black robe, and asked with a face full of anger. The woman in the black robe stared at him with her dark red eyes, revealing a cold murderous intent. She said in a low voice, I thought there was no one here. I didn't expect a flea like you to be here. Consider yourself pitiful. I have to kill you. I can't reveal my whereabouts. The woman in the black robe spoke in the human language, but her accent was awkward and awkward. It sounded weird. Ji Tianqing was even more certain that the woman in the black robe was a member of the alien tribe. He stared coldly at the woman in the black robe and said in a low voice, Woman, you are really vicious. I don't even know you, and I have no grudges with you. You want to kill me? No matter where you are from or where you are going, it has nothing to do with me. His meaning was clear. No matter who the woman in the black robe was or what she was planning to do in the dark wind cave, it had nothing to do with him. As long as the woman in the black robe wasn't very cruel and vicious, she should have turned around and left after hearing what he said. Ji Tianqing said that because he had no other choice. The woman in the black robe was too powerful. He had no chance of winning, so he could only swallow his anger. However, he underestimated the woman in the black robe's cruelty. Since you saw me, you deserve to die. The woman in the black robe laughed coldly. She suddenly turned into a cloud of black fog, passed through the black iron door, and entered the stone room. Her scarlet eyes revealed a cold murderous intent. She reached out her bloody hand again and grabbed at Ji Tianqing's head. At the critical moment, Ji Tianqing's nerves tensed up, and he burst out with all his strength. Wind Thunder Strike. He instantly activated 2 half-meter-long golden sword chi, and slashed at the woman in the black robe from the left and right. The golden sword chi mixed with the violent hurricane, and turned into a half-meter-long lightning bolt, and slashed at the woman in the black robe. Bang! The lightning bolt was blocked by the bloody hand, and a muffled sound was heard. You're tuning into the Han Lee's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.